pleasure for me to be here with you, together with this group of panelists that I hope you can literally seize, as I will do specifically talking about this very important topic. As my colleague presented, I would like to perhaps just give a brief introduction of each of them and what they can contribute. So we are joined by Andres Tata. He's the director for LATAM of Amazon Web Services. He's worked in the public sector, and he will certainly provide the vision of a big tech that is seeking opportunities in terms of working with GovTech startups. Aside from him, we have Bruno Brito with us. He is a managing partner of Cedro Capital. Cedro Capital is an investment fund based in Brazil that has already invested in some GovTech startups, already 9 in their portfolio, and now he's launching a new fund with investment proposals, specifically in the GovTech sector, because they're seeing a great opportunity in this field where investors perhaps have not realized the whole potential there is. And we're also joined by Carolina Ochoa Coepke. She is partner and project coordinator for Quintesa. Quintesa is an accelerator focused on impact startups, and what they are seeking in GovTech is how to generate public value and value beyond the B2B and B2G models. Thank you for joining us. We are also joined by Idoya Ortiz. She is the COO and co-founder of Gobe. Gobe is a specialized study in GovTech, and they have accompanied in several regions in countries, both in Latin and Europe, and they seek to create a closer contact between those two worlds, the world of startups and public administrations. Thus, she can provide a vision of how this transition is undergoing and what is the current status of this topic at a worldwide level. And finally, but not least important, my colleague Miguel Ángel Porrua. He is a main specialist of digital government in the public side of the IDB, meaning he works directly with national governments, specifically in the digital transformation processes and the needs that are entailed. So thank you all for joining me this afternoon. I'd like to start by providing a bit of context in relation to how we define GovTech. I think that now we see quite a fanatism for this word about GovTech and how to work between, or how to create working streamlines between the government and startups. GovTech basically covers how governments work with the private sector, creating new solutions, new dynamics, and with a special focus on startups. Startups that, well, based on technology and data generation, can contribute new solutions and new ways of working for these public administrations, be it for improving the services, but also with the aim of improving their policies, specifically creating policies around all this data that is being generated. Can I perhaps ask technical support for us to be able to see the screen? GovTech, well, aside from this possibility of improving public utilities and accompanying transformation, digital transformation processes of public administrations, it can also be a local development proposal, as it is public budget channeled towards technology, and this can be aimed at improving and expanding the startups and digital SMEs ecosystem, thus creating more aggregated value and sustainability. Something I'd like to highlight and perhaps provide as an initial message is that GovTech is not only about solutions to improve public administration, meaning improving communication, traceability of documents within public administration, but it also entails other types of solutions, solutions, be it, for example, improving other types of services. Actually, this morning we had an agenda on platinum entrepreneurship projects in Mexico. And Mexico's startup was actually talking about also caretaking services. But we're also including a better management and creation of data for public management. Thus, we are talking about these type of solutions when we talk about GovTech, as well as solutions that have to do with citizenship participation, public consultation, be it for budgets or more specific topics. So GovTech is an additional tool within the toolbox that can be used for digital transformation. We are very interested in this topic. We believe that there's a whole world of startups. I mean, we've been talking for almost 2 days about startups, the impact they can create, and we're seeing how these startups disrupt certain sectors. However, they still need to really reach the public sector. And that's why we are offering this panel to talk about how we can enter this ecosystem. So today's objective is to really take advantage of these panelists who are seeing these advantages and ask them what is that entry point, what is their role, and what do they think about the current status of this topic. So Idola, I would start perhaps with you. What are the opportunities you deem in this topic? Well, I am quite a fan, as you've seen perhaps about the GovTech sector. I deem that there are immense opportunities, but I wanted to propose two initially. The first one is, well, the opportunity to open a new market, perhaps not such a new market, but certainly a new market for a certain type of digital suppliers such as startups and scale-ups. And what we are analyzing is that in LATAM, around 20 or 25% of the GDP of LATAM countries depend on public contracting, but we're also talking about a budget that already exists. What we need to do is open it up to other types of solutions, to a type of market that can really has a lot of needs, and public administration so far is not really perhaps the most risk-taking party. But in the industry, there are already existing applications that can certainly add a lot of value. And secondly, well, there's a scalability potential because we're talking about a market composed of many institutions that are needing very specific types of products and services that are quite similar. Why? Because the needs are quite similar. Thus, we believe that it's about opening up a new market that in the case of LATAM is quite large and has great potential. And the second point, and once again I want to propose this opportunity in this panel, well, this is an opportunity for impact investment funds, and specifically under this impact entrepreneurship logic. One of the things that have most caught my attention in GovTech is the distance, the gap between the investor and the impact investor with the GovTech sector. And that doesn't really make sense to me, because if you really want to create impact in the citizenship, and the citizenship needs more and more of these type of solutions and innovation, you need to work with the public sector. There's GovTech that works with private hospitals, yes, amazing, but if you want to create a larger impact in the citizenship in general, you need to work with the public sector. So I really think, and specifically in LATAM, due to the need and the public administration we have, and due to the type of impact investment we have, this is a great opportunity that perhaps hasn't been so visible until now.
No, creo que el tema
Thank you for your input. I think this topic about impact investment and this transition, meaning the opportunity that these startups are creating in terms of the impact and the value, I think that that's a great opportunity, and perhaps such way to now introduce Carolina, who has experience in impact startups and the B2C model. Well, I fully agree with what you just said, Idola. As an accelerator of impact investments, it's impossible not to be in the B2G. That's exactly where impact is, deep impact, also due to the size of the sector. So Quintessa is an accelerator of those impacts, and we have been now working for 14 years in Brazil, and we're much more focused on impact innovation and open innovation, both with the public and private sectors. And we're currently undergoing or developing an approach to specify or focus more in B2G. taking into account that Brazil has 27 federal states, 25 large cities, a public administration for around 200 million inhabitants. Thus, there are many, many challenges to overcome in public administration matters. And in the last 3 years, we are living quite an important momentum for GovTech in Brazil because we had recent bills or acts that were approved and that facilitate this process and that could perhaps be inspiring for other LATAM countries. A new bill that was passed is called the Regulatory Framework of Startups. That's literally the literal translation from Portuguese, which enables this innovation process quite broadly, as it allows not only price to be a criteria, but other criteria to be included, and also a test to be done on that B2G business that will be carried out. And that test can be compensated, be it by public budget or by budget of the third sector or companies. So that enables that in a specific city, for example, a GovTech can be tested for, let's say, 6 months or a year and a half, and if the outcome is successful, then it can be hired directly by public budget in around 1 month. So this is quite an enabling process, and in Brazil we're currently strengthening GovTech accelerators. And I think my colleague will tell us more about GovTech investors because we're currently in a very thriving moment about this, or in relation to this in Brazil. And I just wanted to add about what Idola mentioned about this transition from B2B to B2G. Taking into account that lots of B2B companies really achieve an economic sustainability, have a team, and transition to B2G and can grow in market, in size, but they need to really be aware that they need to adjust both their services and products to B2G. So timelines can be quite different. The entrepreneur needs to want this quite ambitiously because this is for the long run. Another important point is for startups that want to go to B2G is to have partnerships with, for example, a buffet of or lawyer offices, because it's important to have legal support when you perhaps surpass legal frameworks or thresholds. And what's also to be taken into account in B2G is, for example, having a rigorous process in sales registry. For example, what we see that the B2G or their B2C sales registry is very well complex and structured, but when it transitions to B2G, that rigorous scheme somehow gets lost, and that hinders advance. And in Brazil, we're doing exactly that, using and honing on these new innovations. And I will perhaps tell you a bit more about this in the following question. It's about how we're using for the first time this framework about startups in Brazil, which was quite successful. But I will share about that in the next question. Well, Carolina, I think that there are two questions that I want to ask you, but perhaps I'd like to touch upon this topic about public policies and these enabling instruments for this transition. And for this, I'd like to ask now Miguel Angel Borrua, as he works with the public sectors. So I want to ask you, what are those policy instruments that create that demand, that openness? Well, thank you, Natalia, and thank you for inviting us to this conversation. And thank you as well to the organizers. I like it that we don't have a stopwatch right here, because I remember that we had a by-the-minute agenda. I was quite intimidated by this. So I will just look at the audience so I don't get your cue to stop. So I am the Gov representative of this panel. That means that, well, perhaps I'm the boring presenter right here, but with Gov becomes GovTech, that becomes more interesting. But if you would bear with me, I think that our sector can certainly generate very interesting opportunities for you. What is the policy? And Carolina and Idola touched upon this a bit, and I will just specify some bullet points so I don't surpass those 2 minutes that I have. So I would say, first, the country needs a digital agenda with a digital government plan composed of activities, clear objectives, and resources, money. Entrepreneurs know this. If there's no money allocated to a project, they know that they won't really be successful. Second, a regulatory framework that favors risk taking in the private sector, Regulation that enables, for example, procurement or buying from smaller companies, meaning less requirements for certain statements or financial restrictions, which is many times something restricting for entrepreneurs. That they establish reasonable payment deadlines. Those that are now enforced are not really applicable for entrepreneurs. A strong institutionality aside from the agenda and the plan, the governments must have institutions with qualified people to really define what can be done with technology to improve the sector. That is, I think, the reality of what many governments of the regions are lacking. And as Carolina well mentioned, there must be a funding channel with public resources with of capital risk funds. I've seen cases in Israel, Spain. There are fund channeling government funds to basically boost also this risk capital. And also the government must favor the ecosystem. Those big technological companies must be the anchor for this. If you go to, for example, the cybersecurity sector of Israel, we see that it's not a casualty that now we see 600, 700 companies exporting over $700 million. We have Checkpoint and all the big ones, including Amazon with important labs that drive this digital agenda, which is the development of GovTech and the entrepreneur. And this shouldn't be in an opposing direction to the great corps. I deem it as part of the ecosystem as a whole. So I'd say that with these elements, we can create a public policy that can favor GovTech. Thank you, Miguel. Aside from all these elements, we also need investment in all these startups. And I'd like to now ask Bruno, why should we invest in GovTech when we also have this challenge, for example, of entrepreneurs that have a B2C model to find these perhaps more patient investors?
Alô, alô. Oh. Gracias, Nicole. Primero, perdón por mi...
First off, let me please apologize for my Spanish. I am, in fact, Brazilian. So I do feel a little out of my depth in Spanish. Therefore, I would prefer to change to English in a moment. But let me first say thank you to the IDB for this invitation to attend. It is fantastic to be here and share our experience with you. I will now switch to English.
Managing partner of Cedro Capital. We are a venture capital firm based in Brazil. We have been investing in startups and technology companies for about 10 years. And what we figure out is when we look to the private sector, we realized a huge adoption of technology by private companies. So cloud computing, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, so on and so forth. And what is known as the digital transformation of private companies. So this is the movement that has been going on for the last 10, 15 years. And when we look for the public sector, we see a huge gap. So, and of course, opportunities. So that's why we decided last year to launch a fund specific to invest in GovTech companies. We have been, the fund started in December last year, so we are closing our first investments. And what we have seen, but the fund is focused solely in Brazil. Up to now, and we have seen, huge opportunities due to the lack of public services that, that's the reality of Brazil and many other countries in Latin America. So in a broader view, that's kind of the investment thesis, and yeah, we can explore more and forward.
Gracias, Bruno. Y ahora quisiera aprovechar.
I would now like to hear from Andrés. Why would a big tech with a director specialized only in the public sector be focusing on GovTech. Why did you do that? What did you see? Well, of course. Good afternoon, and thank you, IDB Lab, for this invitation. We have a public sector specialized in the ABC of things, but that's not only the government. While I do work with the public sector in Latin America, this means government, both federal, state, and even municipal governments. This also means that we work with public and private education, as well as the health sector. And additionally, we also look at non-profit organizations, such as chambers of commerce here in Colombia, banking, and so on and so forth. Why do we have this specialization? We do this to ensure that we have sufficient closeness to our clients, speak the same language as them, and really build trust. We want to understand our clients' business, and in doing so assist them not only in digital transformation, but also in the transformation of their business itself. So we see enormous opportunity in the public sector, in all of the verticals that I have just mentioned, specifically in the government sector. We see an extremely important opportunity. We see that innovation is a fundamental part of our DNA. Necessary. We are working together in developing solutions that create a real impact to benefit citizens in the countries where we work. We started working with the cloud a long time ago now, in 2006. For the first 7 years, we were alone there. The idea of a public cloud was very new, but that gave us an advantage. There is a phrase that I love from Amazon, which is, there is no algorithm that can encapsulate the whole experience. In 2011, we launched a partners network globally. We had 100 partners around the world, and now in 2021, we are more than 100,000 partners working on digital transformation for our clients. And in Latin America, we have hundreds of these aforementioned clients. This is extremely important in what we do. So to close, I would like to mention the following. How can GovTechs, how can our partners really leverage the activities through the AWC cloud and work with governments? We have the AWS Marketplace, and in this case, governments do not want to locate their ISV there because they don't want this ISV to be available for everyone. But here the idea is to have a win-win for everybody. It's a win for the government because governments here have a solution for their citizens, and this is also scalable at a global level because our marketplace is globally available. And there's a win for this GovTech, this partner, because they automatically have access to a solution that they can connect with the AWS platform. This is a win for us because our culture is truly obsessed with our client. This is truly encrusted and embedded in what we do. So, to close my answer to this question, I would say, please, get excited. I would like to see this room full next year because there are enormous opportunities here. For anything related to GovTechs, let me give you two very quick examples. Firstly, in recent years, we have worked with more than 20 Latin American governments to help them in their electoral processes. More than 20 governments have conducted their either presidential or state elections in the AWS cloud. I can give a publicly available example, which is the example of Brazil. In October of last year, they had their presidential elections. And everything was run on the AWS cloud. I don't know if anyone would like to take a guess as to the demand for information requests each second at the peak hour on that Sunday of the presidential elections. Would anyone like to take a guess? Take a stab at it? Otherwise, I can respond. Nobody? 100,000 per second? 1% of the population? That would be 200,000, 300,000. Each second. 1.5 million information requests per second. If you're not using the cloud, that's impossible. And here, we're talking about 90 million information requests per minute at the peak time of those presidential elections. So this is the flexibility that we can have with the cloud. And let me go back to the metaphor of the four-legged table. We also worked with the state of Guanajuato in Mexico. They have made their tax collection system much quicker, agile, and more economical using the cloud. And we see new policy in Brazil with regards to using the cloud. And so a lot of governments are really leveraging their GovTech efforts with AWS. Thank you very much. And the four-legged table does have a leg, which are GovTechs, as you said. So the GovTechs are there. Or are they there? That's the question. Is there sufficient offering, supply? Carolina spoke previously about tracing out the B2B to B2C transition and spoke about EduTech in Brazil. Okay, that is the mic that is not working. Yes, it is working. It is working. Fantastic. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about Impulsionar. This is a program which is funded by IDB Lab and also by Lemon and Imaginable Futures. These are very large educational funds that operate in Brazil. Impulsionar has a complex and systemic vision of responding to this challenge to get GovTechs advancing, and more specifically EdTechs advancing in the public sector in Brazil. There are several actors involved in this system. We have 25 organizations involved working together to advance in the public sector. The program was created in 2021, so it's been going for just over 2 years. It will come to an end at the end of July, and we have a pilot program operating in 7 cities in Brazil. And the idea is to support municipal secretariats in their educational areas. The idea is to reduce learning gaps. We work in the educational sector, but we use technology to do so. Impulsionar in its pilot project is working in 7 cities once again, looking at a new educational model. And so we are focusing specifically on education, but also looking at public procurement. And so when it comes to public procurement, we look at both supply and demand. So I will focus more specifically now on public procurement rather than the educational piece. When it comes to supply, what we do is we support municipal governments in creating open innovation processes. We provide them training in this area, and then we help them to select the CETECs which have the appropriate offering for their needs. On the side of EdTechs, we support implementation of their initiatives in these 7 cities. It's not only B2G, but also this local effort. And additionally, we have an additional axis which really helps to reinforce EdTechs in their B2G model. So we help them with coming up with their roadmaps, their funding plans, their business plans. Basically, we help them to fine-tune their commercial machinery. We have already had some success cases. What we were able to do was to use the startup or the regulatory framework for startups in this specific sector. This law was created in 2021, and in 2022 we were able to use this framework in 3 cities. These are very small cities that have many vulnerable demographics, and if you bring everything in an ecosystem together, you can be very successful. And so when you look at the edtechs in these cities, we had 2 specific success cases. The tests were very, very successful. And then we worked with these edtechs for a year. And a couple of edtechs really loved the solution, and now they will have public funding available. So this is a fantastic legacy for the program. And so we will see these efforts continue now for a couple of years in the educational sector in these municipalities. And so they will be using these edtechs in public schools in the region. This was fantastic. We have another success case, which is that one of the GovTechs that we support received for the first time ever investment from the Yunus Fund in Brazil. That's a very well-known fund, but they had never before invested in a GovTech. They did not have the mandate that, for example, Cedro Capital has, but really, basically their mandate was just to include additional actors in their work. And so this effort will come to an end in July. We don't yet have the final results, but at least the initial results are very promising. And the idea is to take Impulsionar to other cities in Brazil and hopefully other parts of Latin America to replicate this model, which once again is systemic, which involves public procurement and several actors. So I would say that we are just starting to trace out this new investment thesis, and also we are trying to include positive elements for climate change. This was all possible thanks to IDB Lab, which really took a bet on our program and helped us to create this ecosystem to facilitate this kind of action. Bruno and I are here from Brazil, but I think it's very important that Brazil connect with the rest of Latin America. A lot of the time we're really distanced from other Latin American countries. I really love to be here because I am Brazilian, but my mother is Peruvian. So I feel like I represent this connection between Brazil and Latin America, my very DNA. But anyone else who'd like to engage, please, you are welcome to do so. I think you're really painting a very positive picture of GovTechs in Brazil. You have funds, you have accelerators, you have the regulatory framework, the bank working also on digitalization and public digital transformation. But I don't know if we have such a positive outlook in the rest of Latin America, the Caribbean, and the rest of the world. I would like to take advantage of Iloya's presence to ask her what she thinks that the GovTech situation is like and the appetite for GovTech in the rest of the world. Okay, let me start with the good news. I think that we can break this down into 3 parts. There are some countries that are already on another page. Being a startup or a large company doesn't really, make a difference when it comes to a public contract. For example, South Korea or Singapore. You don't need to have this kind of differentiation because really when it comes to public procurement, they are equally competitive. It's a different context, a different situation. They're already really far ahead. And then we have other Anglo-Saxon countries that got started with this in 2013, 2014. In the USA, the first GovTech program arose in San Francisco. And in Silicon Valley, of course, everything is happening. But they created this startup in residence program so that this could be replicated outside of San Francisco. The idea is to identify new challenges and new vendors and really respond to future demands in the municipality. And then we also have other countries such as the UK, New Zealand, Australia, where they did not see this as a startup logic. It's not about buying a startup and that's it, but rather they looked at this as a public policy issue. And we've spoken a lot about the British approach, Miguel and I, but it's really strategic and it's really planned to open up the market and also build capacities and be more competitive when it comes to procurement, investment, and so on and so forth.
Y después vemos una
And then we see a wave that started around the years 2017, 2018, and I'd highlight the European and Latin regions, where we started to see different spaces, specifically from the demand side, that start to create their own labs, where they've defined challenges, they've defined suppliers, etc. At a LATAM level, I would also like to highlight the work that the IDB Lab has done, because without a doubt it has been a way of articulating everything that is happening. It's a project that's creating a LATAM narrative for GovTech that perhaps was not non-existing or not so strong as now. And without a doubt, it's a project that, in this case, we work with 10 municipalities in Latin America, and we create these open innovation processes. And what we have as an outcome are data of the interest of the market or the capacity of the market to respond to these challenges. For example, in the last boot camp that was developed in our program, over 300 LATAM startups applied to learn more and for us to help them in this transitional process from B2C or from B2B or to B2G. So that's quite clear, and this, I think, reflects the interest and the need for this space in Latin America. In this region, we are seeing the initial examples. For example, Cordoba, Argentina, they were not able to be here, but they created the first GovTech fund, and we from the Spanish government see it as a great example, and also in the European market. Now, the European logic is quite interesting as well, because as I said before, this GovTech agenda is quite aligned with the digital innovation one, which is being mobilized by the European Commission. So we're talking about a single market, and this logic of startups and scale-ups selling to public administrations all throughout Europe is a topic very much focused and touching on open startups. So we see that this is a trending topic, and we're also identifying that the demand of the public administration is ever more clear. And in that wave, we see Google, Oracle, and other great integrators that now see that they need to respond in another way to their public demand. Thus, they are trying, and I'm just saying, they're starting to collaborate in a very shocking collaborative endeavor between the public and private stakeholders. Of course, there needs to be collaboration. However, there's really big collaboration between the big ones and the smaller actors. And perhaps the other one that is perhaps not so excited to be in this space is investment. I have a theory about this, and it may perhaps not come off in the best way possible, but the managers of investment funds, although they're from impact investments, perhaps they come from an environment where the public sector is not really appealing. And if it's somehow appealing, they have a series of myths around the public sector, and that creates a whole barrier. So I think that there's certainly an educational or a raising awareness space, where we can identify, these are the real myths and these aren't real myths. And this is important because investment in this sector is important. So at a regional level, I think we can identify 3 different waves, and at an ecosystem space level, perhaps the most challenged stakeholder or side is investors or investment. And I think that the IDB Lab has a very important role to play. It's not only about maintaining this positive mindset, but it's also about tackling an agenda. Now, Miguel Angel, I'd like to ask about the work that you've developed in the region. Where would you identify demand to be? What sectors or which technologies are where startups can have a higher demand in the region? Once again, I won't look at you directly and keep eye contact with you so that you don't give me my cue. I wanted to elaborate further on this example of Israel, but I feel very sorry about this because I should have mentioned Uruguay. Sometimes things exist, but they don't have an appealing label. Uruguay made a great advance and effort in the GovTech in 2008. I'm just going to give you some data. So when the national government agency, was created in Uruguay, and they created this digital agenda, and they created these policies, part of which I was participating. There were around 8,000 people working in the ICT sector. Right now, there's more. There had been investment in Uruguay around $1,500 million. They basically developed this GovTech development because the government basically bet on this. And the director of the ICT, Mr. Gastroni, many of whom you know, was also head of the National Agency of Procurement. Perhaps that's random, but perhaps it helped. Now, where do the opportunities lay? I believe that opportunities in the public sector are exactly where the public sector feels more pressure on the needs, those citizen needs, right? And so resources become scarce. That's where the opportunity, the largest opportunity lays. For example, the health sector. This is a sector with a huge potential, and perhaps we can't really understand why our region or the citizens of all our region can't have a digital health record. Or, for example, telehealth for all of those who have families and lived COVID, right? Well, it was quite calming for us to have telehealth medical appointments. I think that needs to be normalized and expand to much more ambitious endeavors. I deem a huge space and potential. Now, citizenship safety. We have one of the most higher criminal rates in the world. Police with really low funding, and then police organizations and other types of the world with drones and huge allocation of resources. Everything related also to fraud, customs, tax fraud, where technology becomes much more sophisticated. Thus, there's, I think, potential for GovTech where advanced technology and forefront technology is used. That is where I deem a huge potential. Another huge potential is perhaps, well, the legacy of COVID in the region is over 30% of poverty, around 15 million immigrants, meaning social services. We need to care for these people, and the government falls short. There is, I think, extraordinary potential for entrepreneurs with good ideas about how to use this technology, propose solutions for policy decision makers. And perhaps I'm going to go a bit beyond this. I think we should start telling governments, look, we need customized services and proactive services. Amazon knows quite well how to do this, meaning we already have these people with social needs. Let's not tell them, go to this office with a hard copy of this and this document. Entrepreneurs have an extraordinary potential for this. And, well, with ChatGPT, which I think is now here to literally be the cherry on top of the cake. And it makes this a very appealing space to attract the public sector and investors to basically create and manage data. And I think these are two phrases that are key for the public sector. This is certainly complex to adopt and assimilate, and thus I think that there's a space for tech entrepreneurs to advance that public sector agenda. Those are some ideas I just wanted to share. If there's an extra round, I can share more. Yes, I think we could stay for perhaps 3 more hours, but I think we don't have that much time. We have around 2 minutes left, or five. I think we shouldn't have asked that. Yes, it's better to perhaps not know those type of answers. I'd like to now, I think you gave me ideas about other things I can ask, but now that we have 5 minutes left, I'd also like to ask you about your vision as you work in the region. You already have worked with the public sector. What is your vision about LATAM in 5 years' time, and what are those efforts that perhaps we should be investing? So several cases have been mentioned, and I'd like to touch upon these. First, we need to start to understand what is the path that we've already walked to understand where AWS is heading towards in the next 5 years. And we've seen in the last few years millions of clients in LATAM migrating their services to the cloud at a very fast pace. Obviously, none of us would have desired the pandemic to happen. However, the pandemic made governments who perhaps doubted about this whole sector to actually start acting like startups and actually start to fast pace their decision-making processes. In processes that we estimated 5 years to happen, these happened between 5 weeks and even 5 days. And I'm not exaggerating, amidst the pandemic, we have migrated to certain workloads of governments or academic institutions in 72 hours to the cloud. There was no other option because we were all under lockdown. Today, we estimate that 10% of what is in the cloud at a global level is in the cloud, and in LATAM, that's 5%. Thus, we're not late. We're just starting. Actually, we say that this is a tsunami, if you will. There is quite a strict acceleration pace. So to answer your question about what is our vision in 5 years' time is, well, we see a much faster rhythm of acceleration and the migration to the cloud on behalf of governments, not only tending to the needs of the citizens, working, obviously, hand in hand with GovTechs and cloud services. Now, governments basically migrate or transition to the cloud to reduce costs. That is the first or the main reason why they do this. And from an IBC study of year 2022 says that governments that use clouds services have actually created savings of around 25% in their costs of IT technology per year. That is the average. However, we have cases of 40-50% savings. We actually just mentioned one. Idoia mentioned Cordoba, Argentina. They migrated in 8 weeks their mainframe to the cloud, and they achieved to reduce in over 90% the cost they previously had. And they had a reduction of 60 days of downtime to actually carry out maintenance of their server, to an availability of around 99.9% of availability. Minas Gerais in Brazil as well, they created over 90% of reduction in costs. Now, I'd like to talk about 2 examples because I feel that they illustrate what can be done. And as I said, we're just in the initial phase of this tsunami. One example is here in Bogota. This Segave, this is the public cleaning service. So once all the data are migrated to the cloud, big data and machine learning and data analysis and AI is employed. The cleaning public service in Bogota benefits 2.5 million citizens in Bogota, 580 trucks literally picking up waste, collecting waste all night. And what we've done is collected with AI data, and we send every 30 seconds the specific location of the waste collecting trucks, improving thus services, reducing waste, and reducing downtime of the trucks. I think I need to stop you because we're having the next panel and audience entering this room now. So I started at the bank 20 years ago with the e-government agenda with Pablo Valenti from Uruguay, one of the many countries where I had the pleasure to work in. And I am quite thrilled that this agenda, well, going from the local and regional development in Fomin at that time, and to see that previous experiences that are not replaceable by algorithms can be found and certainly can be seized. From the IDB Lab, well, this is an agenda that we're currently developing with several projects that not only serve to the demand, but also the supply and the creation of ecosystems. We have projects that are developing also this B2G, this B2B to B2G transition. In Cordoba, we have the first fund in GovTech. We are also working on how to develop these acquisition processes. For example, Brazil doesn't share this regulatory framework with us or with the other countries in the region. That's where we have to work with the other actors of the ecosystem that want to really bet in making these two worlds much more close. So Without a doubt, it's been a pleasure to hear this panel. And as you will hear from each panel, we have a QR code. Now, this is being transformed into a no hub where we will be exchanging resources as well as the different actors to share and exchange and advance on different topics. And what we'd like now is to invite you all to scan the QR code and answer what are those main challenges that we should be working on in the near future. Thank you to the panelists, and we will continue this conversation.
Very good afternoon. We would like to welcome you all and ask that you please take a seat for this next session. Welcome to this panel in which together we will be exploring how we might be able to reverse financial exclusion in an area with accelerated aging. Silver finance and silver economy will play a central role in helping elderly people in the region to close a digital gap and access services, products, and financial channels adapted to their specific needs, as well as preferences. I would like to first introduce you to Constanza Boix, co-founder of Nula Prop. Also welcome to Gerd Weisbach, General Director for Latin America and the Caribbean for Sparkassenstiftung Alemania. I'm sorry, I'm sure that I butchered that pronunciation. We are also joined by Michael Brian Newbold, the Head of Economic Analysis at the Bank of Opportunities, and finally Marisela Alvarenga, the Head of Financial Intermediaries in the IDB Invest area. Welcome, and we'd like to invite you to start our panel. First off, I was asked to please tell you that IDB Lab is evolving to become an innovation hub for development. So we would ask that you please identify the challenges that you can see where innovation and startup innovation might make a difference, and also the market potential. So we will now be seeing a QR code up on screen to respond to these questions. It would be very, very useful for us in the future to be able to respond to the needs we have in the region. Okay, so with that said, this morning we heard that we are in a region that is growing at an accelerated rate when it comes to our elderly population. People above the age of 65 will double from here to 2050. And Latin America has to take action. We have to look for solutions and look at the right way to respond to the needs of this aging population. This is not only for products and services, but this morning we heard about how financial services that the elderly population also needs to have access to during their whole lives. From the time that we start working or that we're younger to the time that we retire, we need access to these products. And so we are now talking about silver financing, reversing financial exclusion. It is a great honor to have these panelists with us, Michael, Constanza, and Gerd. Can you, and do you see that I do know how to pronounce the name of your organization? As we were saying, in Latin America, we are seeing accelerated growth and aging. But silver finance has also drawn the attention of not only public policy and politicians, but also the academic sector and business. That's what we want to talk about today. Okay. So now we are thinking about what is going to happen. We see this as an opportunity to do new things and to see our lives from a different perspective. It's diverse because the population also ages in a certain way. Some people will age and they will be very active, they will do exercise, they have a very active outlook on life and they stay fit, but we will have others who will need care and will age in a different way and will have different types of income. For this reason, it is crucial that we have an innovative vision of this phenomenon. This is not only a load for us to carry, but we also have to think about how we might offer a better quality of life to these aging people and ourselves have a better quality of life in the future. And so we have products and services in the financial sector. We have seen how financial institutions are already serving this sector. In Spain, you can see that there are specific programs for seniors. CaixaBank has, and Santander has its seniors program. So they offer discounts, for example, in the tourism sector, all the way to the insurance sector, where they have diverse products to respond to these sectors' needs. In Japan, there's another type of insurance where they have used technology to identify how the population has grown, and different insurance products. They're not the same kinds of insurance products that we are used to. Really, what they've done is used algorithms and technology to define what kind of products they need. There are different products on offer in Korea. I've already mentioned Japan. Not only in Asia, we also have examples in Latin America. In Chile, we have what we call cajas de compensación. And basically what they do is that they deal with the debt carried by elderly people. And it's not only with financing, but also consultation programs so that we can show elderly people how to use digital credit cards. The pandemic arrived and digitalization was essential to be able to continue accessing credit cards. So we have this publication from the IDB, Civil Financing, Reversing Financial Exclusion, to really identify various business opportunities and look at how this has evolved in the region. With no further ado, we will now hear from our panelists. Let's start with Michael. Michael is from the Bank of Opportunities, Banco de las Oportunidades, and they have carried out several studies and published many articles with data reported from people over the age of 65. What have we learned about inclusion? Tell us what has happened here in Colombia with regards to savings as well as payments. Fantastic. Thank you so much to the IDB Lab team and the IDB for this invitation. It is a true honor. It is a pleasure to be here with you today, talking about one of the matters that most interests us at Banco de las Oportunidades, this exercise of data consolidation, looking at supply and demand for decision-making. For decision-making from a public policy perspective, but also when it comes to the design of products for financial institutions and different vendors for financial services. Banco de las Oportunidades is a national government program which is in charge of implementing inclusion innovations for education and financial services, amongst others. We use competitive intelligence, which is what I will talk about today, but we also have a very robust series of practices. How can we really close the gaps that we identify in the area that I lead? By having concrete initiatives to access financial services and products in the formal sphere. I'd like to give you a little bit of context. It would be great if we could have a couple of slides here that we could share to you. We'd like to talk about how we are dealing with financial inclusion here in Colombia. This information comes from financial obligation reports. These are reports that you're surely familiar with in other parts of the world. So these are credit bureaus or information centers. In Colombia, we work with one specific bureau for the use and access to credit products, which is what you're seeing up here on screen. So to give you a bit of context, Colombia has an indicator, an access indicator above 90%. And so this is what we have seen in global fintechs in the World Bank that gathers information. But we see that demand must also capture people's perceptions. This information is the report that is, or the reports that are issued by financial institutions to bureaus. So this is perhaps different to what you have in mind. These are financial inclusion indicators for Latin America and the Caribbean. We have access indicators of 90%. So what is the challenge? Well, the challenge is in the gaps that exist. And at Banco de las Oportunidades, what we have tried to do is to really get down to a granular level and understand these gaps, to go to specific details. And we are talking about gaps when it comes to access to credit and deposit products, looking at different age ranges. To get started with this panel, first off, we see that the percentage of adults who have at least one financial product, we see here a gap of 6 percentage points. So that's the gap between the red and the blue points, 92.3 to 86.3. I won't go through each single piece of data because I'd like to go into detail and have a much more enriching conversation about what explains this behavior. I would, however, like to highlight two things. Firstly, access to credit. That's the third line. We can see here a gap of 8 percentage points. Once again, the difference between the red and the blue dots up on screen. When you look at these 8 percentage points and you make them relative to the total, or you relativize them, so to speak, looking at access amongst the broader population, this is a significantly higher gap. And so this is the first challenge that we should go into detail about. And then we have the gap when it comes to deposit products. It's almost 20 percentage points. That is the last line here up on the graph. 20 percentage points. And this is mainly explained by the penetration that Colombia has recently had when it comes to sight deposit products. And so Colombia has significant gaps here when it comes to access of finance products, specifically deposit on demand products. And so here we are talking about digital gaps and digital appropriation in different demographic groups. In the case of credit, Colombia has had also a stagnation. So credit access indicators in all of our different areas, regardless of the rural area, rural nature, and age ranges, where we see the lowest levels of access is amongst elderly people over the age of 65. And so we have these challenges when it comes to the offerings of products, but we also have unique challenges related to the life cycle when it comes to people aged above 65. So this is just a couple of things to keep in mind. Almost half of the activities carried out by people over the age of 65 are non-remunerated activities. We can talk about this later on. And so 35% of them are dedicated to caring for their homes or other care activities. And then a significant proportion of them receive pension income. So we have to look at educational and financial activities and connect with transformational foundations at the social and economic level in the country. And then on the next slide, just quickly, I would like to show this to my colleagues specifically. We have an exercise that was carried out looking at the demand. Remember that, sorry, I have the clicker, sorry about that. So, I've got control of the presentation, how silly of me. But here we have the demand exercise. This is also very valuable because this is the exercise that directly collects information on people's perceptions. I'm talking about people who have responded to surveys. This is an indicator which uses Consumer Financial Protection Bureau methodology from the United States. The idea here is to understand a little bit about the perspectives that people have when it comes to their financial futures. How do they feel in the financial sense of things? And as you go up in the age range, we see a reduction in financial security. And so this indicator is from 0 to 100. And so here we have 38% of respondents who cannot respond to an unplanned expense. They don't have a way to cover that. 44% of respondents do not feel secure when it comes to their financial future. Once again, the care economy. 18.8% of elderly people have to continue to work instead of retiring. 24.8% of them depend on others, on either their children or other third parties, to survive this stage of their life. And so product design, of course, must take this into account, as well as that connection with the public sector. That's so interesting, Michael. What fascinating numbers. Okay, what is next? What are your future plans? That's a difficult question. Okay, let me go from the general to the specific. when it comes to public policy, we need to really have interinstitutional complementarity, and we need to, well, the way that I see things, there are 4 points. Firstly, we need to have sufficient information for decision making. Okay, here I'm going to put modesty to the side, and I'm going to really pitch what Banca Las Oportunidades has done. Basically, we want an ecosystem in which information really feeds into better decision making, but this information has to recognize what I have just mentioned. Information, or what we can extract when it comes to information on offerings versus what information we have about demand. And so this goes back to what I mentioned earlier. We have to really lay transformational foundations from a public policy perspective. Many countries in the region share a definition of national inclusion, educational and financial strategies. Recently, our country launched a COMPAS, or government policy document, bringing together all of this specific information, looking at inclusion strategies. And here the idea is to recognize the link that exists between financial inclusion policy and social and economic policy. We must be explicit in differentiating between financial and financial product information, looking at different social demographics and age ranges. The third point.
The third point has to do with the links related to policy-driven actions, specifically on financial inclusion. We have many things to comment on, but respecting time limitation, I'll mention two that for the case of Colombia can serve as an example. The first is the national care system. This is framed in the National Development Plan of Colombia. It is the map that entails all governmental actions for the next 4 years. And those established priorities must, on the one hand, acknowledge the cross-cutting nature of different topics and social and economic challenges. And the National Development Plan specifically talks about the creation of a national care system in which we can acknowledge benefits for people who are unprotected in terms of economic safety, provision, and fundamental rights. And as we have seen in the link I previously mentioned from the last slide, the great penetration that care-related activities have in the population over age 65 in our country. Second, this has to do with the roadmap of reforms in our countries. And in Colombia specifically, we have the pension reform that is undergoing development. This reform must acknowledge what has been established in the National Development Plan as the solidarity pillar, which is to articulate basically basic income access with an effective access and the use of deposits and products on-site or on-demand. And the future of the Banca de las Oportunidades is the following, and what we've identified as initiatives is that many financial entities, specifically 3 or 5 years ago, acknowledged that importance of this age group gaps, and they've developed financial products in relation to these silver finances. However, the tier that is missing has to do with the relational model. And touching upon microfinancing is what, in the long term, makes people to build bonds, human, trust-based relationships. And I think that's where we will focus our work in Banca de las Oportunidades. Constanza, you've mentioned, or we've seen already all the gaps that Michael has mentioned in terms of the financial services and products that we need to offer our population of over 65 years of age. The question is, do you think that also has to do with the demand of innovative products? I believe that Well, Nuda is certainly an innovative product. I want you to tell us a bit about how it works, what it's like. Well, thank you for the opportunity. It's a pleasure for me to be here, and I will try to convey the passion I feel for this topic of silver finance and silver economics. The project I'm part of is certainly a silver finance project because we want to improve the welfare of senior population, and it has to do with legal property access. So we've identified the challenges that the senior population have in terms of covering their basic costs, food, household. It is estimated that 50% of seniors cannot fully satisfy their basic needs, although we have a coverage of Social Security that surpasses 98%. However, income that seniors receive is not sufficient. However, 7 out of every 10 people of seniors are actually owners of their property. That happens also in Colombia. Luckily, this need to have a household makes it for seniors to have savings that perhaps in property seem untangible, but actually new property helps mobilize this financial capital so that basically housing can help people live better. So basically I want to introduce what we do. So property can be perhaps divided in two rights, if you will. The right to have a new household and the right of a usufruct or a beneficial interest. So what is the legal advice we provide? So the senior person sells that property that is equivalent to entitling that through a decree or that means that they can continue using their property for their lifetime, or they acquire the benefit to basically sell it if they want to move. So this new property right is basically a tool to obtain more money without going in debt. Because currently people, to cover their basic needs, basically go in debt, which is quite difficult to overcome and perhaps can create unfavorable economic situations, even social isolation, depression. And so what we do is to try to reduce those debts, and so that senior people can actually sell without moving. And we're very aware that when we reach that age, well, we want to continue living in a house that has all our belongings. And so without losing their property, they can fund better their life and to ensure their welfare. So the property is sold at a lower price, of course, because the person who is purchasing cannot really use this property until a determined amount of time, but they do maintain a right to continue living in that household until they die. We are the first platform in Latam and the Caribbean to develop this trade of property, and we've been expressed many other entities in LATAM have expressed their interest because they've told us it's quite an innovative idea, especially for people who are facing these economic challenges and that need that economic backing. We are also aware that we share that civil code so that this possibility is a reality, and we want to continue developing this market so that with very serious accompaniment to create more balanced negotiations between all stakeholders and to safeguard the health of that senior person. We basically calculate the price of sale, a convenient sales price for all stakeholders, and we basically emphasize on focusing on the main problem, seeking the best solutions for that case, and we accompany at the basically a sales and purchasing moment, which is quite celebratory, and we even make photos of it because that makes this social impact tangible. We have brought some testimonies. I won't disclose identity of the people, but a person said, I retired collecting a very low retirement fee. This gave me an economic backing that I had not had before, and thanks to Nuda Prop, I am now living calmly. It helped me have economic safety. It doesn't matter if my expenses get higher, I have income to cover these. Impact has been quite broad, and we've also helped reduce inequality because 75% of people who sell through Nudaprop are actually females. And we know that in retirement age, women actually earn less, so they're much more in need of these type of instruments. For example, she says, my life changed with Nudaprop because it was impossible to live like I wanted to with the low retirement fee I had. I had to do urgent things and maintenance work in the house, and I couldn't. Nudaprop provided me security to continue living in my house with my belongings and my memories. So we want to ensure these well-beings and protection of welfare for seniors. Thank you. The testimonies are quite compelling, and as we mentioned, women actually have less retirement fees or pensions, but we also live longer. The life expectancy average for women is around 5 years more than men, so this product is not only innovative, but absolutely positive for women. What have you learned as a co-founder of this company? What have you learned as a co-founder, and what have you learned from your own clients? Well, we've learned that obviously we would hope for everything to work faster, but this silver finance and services for seniors takes time to develop. It takes time to develop because it also requires a change of mindset, a mindset shift. When we're talking about new property, this is not an inverse mortgage mechanism because perhaps this is the most known mechanism, and it works in relation to basically accepting a debt with a financial institution. What we're doing here is increasing savings combined with we can have an insurance stakeholder that can enable the execution. So seniors don't yet have the knowledge about this tool. However, in Europe, I think since decades, and Garrett knows this well, since decades this is working, and this is more of a common mechanism. However, in Latam and the Caribbean, this is quite a novelty. So lack of knowledge makes the learning curve to be slower. We also have digital gap barriers. Although seniors have smartphones and social media accounts, they're not perhaps so well acquainted with platforms and apps. So we also have a challenge in terms of scalability. We also have challenges in relation to contacting perhaps family members and also re-signifying what inheritance can be, because inheritance can be perhaps parents living quite joyfully in their senior stage of life, and for them to enjoy, right, their assets they finally acquired after a hard-working life. So I think it's about re-signifying inheritance and this concept of distrust, because many seniors are also objectives of frauds, scams, and they are perhaps feeling much more vulnerable. So we are developing partnerships. We developed a partnership with MAPFRE, and in our experience, we've always had institutional support from the main innovation agencies of Uruguay, and luckily, and I think that it was the best thing that could have happened to us in last times, we've been selected by the IDB Lab to support entrepreneurship projects, and we're currently executing this project since last semester. And with this prototype project in Uruguay, however, with a vision of scaling it up. So I think that this is definitely evidence of social impact, an example that conveys trust, and hopefully the path that we have now discovered, well, we've been able to do it with the support. You mentioned scalability. What do we need to scale it up? Is it perhaps something in relation to regulation, funds? Well, as I previously mentioned, this topic of new property is part of the civil code. And literally, this was a copy-paste from European law. So as all silver finance projects, I think we need to change and shift the mindsets in terms of timelines to deploy these solutions. So funds and capital funds specifically that are in this mindset to be able to scale up entrepreneurship projects such as this one. And I think we're innovating, but we're innovating in different sides. For example, we're innovating in terms of silver finance, in changing mindsets, cultures. It's quite a revolution, I dare to say. And also from the governmental standpoint, because I've also spoken to the government to present this before certain regulations, and this also is a long-lasting effort. And governments, I think, also understand that this dynamizes economy because this government that is literally embedded in bricks can be deployed in other ways. So I believe that if we can work hand in hand to provide much more action and well, a certainly a more active dynamic, I think that will be beneficial for all sides. GERT, Sparkassenstiftung, is the case for Germany, also a country that has quite a broad aging population of over 67 years of age in the next years. How are these municipality funds preparing in terms of products, channels? Would you share a bit? Well, thank you very much to the IDB Lab for this invitation and for all of you who are interested in these silver finances, a topic that I think we should certainly be concerned about. So Germany has around 84 million inhabitants, and currently 27 million are of 65 years of age and up. Soon we will have 35 million inhabitants of over 65 years of age. So our challenge is certainly increasing. And we are trying to, well, the Sparkassen, or the compensation funds, tend to over 60% of the German population. We're talking about around 60 million of clients. And of those 60 million clients that we serve, around 350 funds and 150,000 branches. 17 million of our clients are already 65 years old or older.
So we are the majority in the private banking system. We are talking about a demographic that in Germany does have access to financial services. But this has not been something that has come about by luck. We have been very strategic in recent years. In the Sparkassen, we have already been working now for some 30 years. So what that means is that in our organization, we started by offering a savings account product. And we have also been offering mortgages, loans for cars, and so on and so forth. And the idea is to be able to offer all this to our clients. We're very close to our clients. We have focus groups that we run every once in a while. And what we really want to understand is what they need. And the main interests available, or the main interest that we have seen, or the number one interest in Germany, is for elderly people to be able to live peacefully in their own homes for as long as possible. That is the number one desire of all Germans. People do not want to live alone. They do not want to fall into poverty. And they want to be involved in activities, sports, and maintain their health. There's also the issue of wanting to, for example, remodel people's homes so that they can continue to live in them. And if you want to remodel or renovate your home, you of course need access to credit. So basically what we try to do is to support and accompany people throughout their different life stages. And we do this with our savings funds. So what we do is we really try to educate people from the age of 18 or 19 when they start to work. And so what we try to do is to always look at people as a whole, their position in their families, and so on and so forth. And this really plays into what we do in silver finances. What we have to do is ensure that people are prepared. And you have to start doing this when people are 25 years old. And so I have ETFs that have really facilitated things for the whole population. So these ETFs or exchange traded funds will help us even if we manage to save only $50 per week. This is an additional source of income because in Germany, a lot of our money goes to tax. But small and micro business owners do not have access to retirement funds, to pension. They have to prepare themselves by having their savings, by having necessary credit. Credit is much more accessible in Germany. But what they have to ensure they do is that they pay off their homes before the age of 65. Or they have to have a mortgage. So we need to understand these situations. That's what's important. But you also work a lot in Latin America and the Caribbean, so what strategies could you suggest that we learn from or that we implement in our countries to be able to serve the elderly population? Perhaps we need this public policy piece that you have referred to at financial institutions. What do you think? Let me give you a few more examples from Germany and then look at how we have applied that in Latin America. So we have more than 500 companies. We offer an enormous range of financial services. We have, for example, retirement funds, pension funds, so on and so forth, everything that's been spoken about here already. But we also have to have generational management. A lot of families might own a store, a company, and when the older generations decide to retire, it's very difficult to ensure succession. It's hard. And so we also can provide advice in these kinds of situations. So we have to be able to respond not only in offering financial products, but also in offering solutions to these problems that people face in their real lives. So we have non-banking services as well, a lot of technical assistance. For example, we can teach people to manage their budgets when they reach retirement age. We also have digital tools. It's not only about the internet, but also about other tools. We also have a regional digital platform. At our Sparkassen, or once again our German savings banks, we offer and recommend financial products. But our platform, Kala, provides support for elderly people and their families, to give them support with what they need right now. There are some elderly people who are really fit, who want to stay active, who love, for example, participating in yoga and sports clubs, etc. Others connect with the platform to look for a doctor because they need medical services. Others need support in, for example, day-to-day services for their homes. So we can do all of this via Kala, our platform. This is for people aged over 60. Vendors can sign up there, and then elderly people can use these services, and the platform will only then administer or manage the payment to the vendor if the person using the service is 100% satisfied with the service. So it's not only financial services, we go much further. In Latin America, we have tried to look at different services and products that are available. But we have to first raise awareness. We need to go and talk to young people and say, look, if you want to have the same quality of life, the retirement savings you have will not be sufficient. You need to do something else. You have to raise awareness. So people need to start getting ready for retirement 30 years before they plan to retire. That's the first stage. There are some fantastic services, such as yours, those that have been spoken about here on stage, but how do people find them? We also have to work on information accessibility. Where can people find these services? And I think that we could perhaps use Kala, our platform, as a model, and then look at how to adapt that. And lastly, we have to rethink how banking should be done. It's not just about financial services. It's about providing technical assistance. It's about providing comprehensive advice and consultation services to our clients and to our partners so that they are prepared. These are the three main topics that we want to work on in Latin America. And to be more concrete, in Latin America, in different countries, we have been very successful in offering and implementing these savings bank products, for example, in Panama. And it's about also training sellers, sales reps, so that they can also instruct young clients as to the importance of preparing for retirement. We need to train them and show them this is what you should offer to an elderly client versus a young client. We've done this in Panama. We've worked on this somewhat in Mexico and Peru with municipal savings banks. And here in Colombia, we have offered this, but there hasn't been a great deal of interest. But I think there's interest in the general concept in providing comprehensive consultation services. Of course, we are here at your service to help you in any way we might, because we think this is the right way to go. Do you have anything with IDB Lab, something that you could share? Yes, fantastic. Yes, you're absolutely right. Let me talk about that. Let me talk about this project. I have just a few points noted down because I don't want to forget them. First off, it is a great pleasure to work with IDB Lab on silver finances. We are also part of the World Savings Bank Institution, WSBI, and so the idea is to continue moving forward with this, and we are working with IDB Lab, and Sparkassen has signed a convention, a cooperation agreement for 3 years with IDB Lab for the Silver Finance Program and ensuring financial inclusion. And this is specifically to work with the population aged over 65 in Latin America and the Caribbean. As we have heard, we have to take action, and in doing so, we will overcome the financial gap. The idea is to support 8 initiatives, working with vendors who offer financial services, for example, fintechs, social companies, you name it, we've got it. And The idea is to work together. And we are to work with 100,000 people to ensure that they can access financial products. And so the idea is to work on social networks and continue to work with IDB Lab. Anyone who is interested in participating are, of course, invited to do so. Of course, we will involve or use ideas that we already have, but we are also going to look for the best startups in Latin America. And so we would invite you all to participate. We would invite you to talk about this in social networks with your colleagues. The idea is to increase financial inclusion amongst this demographic group. And so the idea is to work with financial institutions that can not yet offer these services. But this is a noble cause, and we are here at your service. And so let's change our focus here. Okay, so you might have seen on social networks that there was a letter written by someone in Spain who was complaining about how we were offering all of our services digitally. This is Carlos San Juan. He is a retiree in Spain. He sent this letter and he got 650,000 signatures because he was complaining that he was looking for someone to provide him with a personal face-to-face service at a physical branch, and he couldn't. And so he was calling, and all he got was press 1, 2, 3, or digital options. What do you think about this?
You were mentioning your platforms, you were mentioning examples in Colombia, you were mentioning product. Well, we are currently we're leading a working group of silver finances within the IDB Lab, where we're also promoting this topic for financial institutions. And we all want to offer this different perspective for seniors. And I think this is a great opportunity, a huge unserved market. I've actually sat with several financial institutions and also brokers to talk about these topics and to learn about their perspectives. Also to see how they used to plan their platforms for seniors, or perhaps to provide more access through, for example, collection channels, so that the seniors could have also an on-site and face-to-face service. And I've encountered quite a resistance to changes and a resistance to adopt changes in services for seniors. I think this requires constant work in bringing awareness and also including figures in the discussions and really quantify the opportunities that this can certainly create for the whole ecosystem. I therefore think that with all these different initiatives, there are also economic prices and economic support. I think that we can leverage this much more, and for us to really create this shift in perspective. Well, in Germany, we first have quite a strong structure of branches. As I mentioned, we have a Sparkasse, or a German savings bank that is smaller, and their leader said, okay, where we don't have a branch, we have forests. We're everywhere. We continue in this endeavor. We closed some branches because we now have a mobile branch. But I mean, we've been for 40 years in the market. So we go to certain municipalities and serve them constantly as well, and this is, I think, also important. And for the areas where we cannot provide our services due to, for example, a digital gap, and of course this is a gap present in Germany, and thanks to the pandemic,
manejar ciertos costos y compran.
Even my parents know how to buy online. However, we have a program driven from the German Savings Bank, which is called the Digital Angel. And the Digital Angel trains senior citizens on digital skills. And this is quite useful for people who still want to learn so that we can provide trainings and online resources to them.
Bueno, yo quisiera traer a la conversación
I'd like to
varios puntos. Lo primero es en el cierre
integrate the following points to this discussion. First,
donde construir
in the closing of these digital gaps, where can we build additional tiers, and perhaps where is more value in terms of digitizing? Something we've done in the Banca de las Oportunidades is basically institutionalizing with different financial industry sectors is how we can perhaps have labs or think tanks, if you will. And something that was mentioned in the panel was change management and change management culture. And this, I think, important mindset that not everything should be digitized. I just want to provide a bit of context about what occurs in Colombia and also linking this with some of the figures I mentioned at the beginning. In Colombia, we have something which is called the low amount deposits, which are basically fully digital products, and you can basically access them with just your ID in real time from a mobile device in 2 to 5 minutes. And what we've seen is that these deposits have allowed us to increase access to financial and banking products in our country, and to some extent have allowed us to create innovative strategies of data-driven lending, because all this transactional information flow is created. But when we analyze the details of it is when we can identify something interesting. For example, in the low amount deposits for seniors of over age 65 is of 20% versus 78% of seniors between, or adults between 18 and 25 years of age. And that 78% is reduced to perhaps 72% in other age groups, meaning there's quite a difference in the gap in the use of these digital products. Now let's analyze this from the productivity, which is basically the proportion of those users that use the products versus those that have the products, for example, the low amount deposits. 53% for seniors of over age 65 and 85% for adults, young adults, those between ages 18 and 25. So something is working well in relation to the penetration of these products, but something is not really working so well in relation to the usage in certain segments. So this once again leads me to the question I introduced at the beginning: where should we digitize? To provide an effective service in terms of also an effective silver finance inclusion, we need to maintain these hybrid models. We need to think about this adequate combination between digitization and on-site and direct and face-to-face services. A clear example is the following. Colombia has been promoting in the last decade, and it's quite common also in Latam and the Caribbean. Brazil is also a forefront example of this in terms of banking branches or this agent-based model. It's basically providing or delegating this to a third party. And I think this is quite a powerful concept that I think has been much more appealing in the last decades, which are embedded finances, meaning I create effective inclusion when my products are literally integrated to the daily transaction activities of people. That's where value is added in products. So what we've seen with these bank offices or branches is, for example, those people that are small shop owners of bakeries, of small laundry shops. Those are the ones who are closer to the community and who are perhaps most adequate to provide these financial services. And this is a model that we in Banca de las Oportunidades deem as key for this tier. Again, back to my question, where can we build these tiers that are lacking? It is exactly in this organic transition between the cash in and cash out networks. That tier is therefore transformed into trust, and in the long term, it allows people to transition gradually to online payment ecosystems and other similar ones. And to conclude this answer, Colombia has advanced quite significantly in modernizing this infrastructure of bank sites or offices, which is a model that is quite lighter in costs and also much more adaptable to perhaps more remote towns, townships, settlements, etc. Great. Actually, you made me think about what we need in different countries to implement these type of mediums, because the financial sector is normally quite regulated. So what is the role that the regulator also plays in the supervisor? We're talking about cash in and cash out, but at the end of the day, this is flowing cash, and we know that the regulation is obviously useful for these transactions to avoid being used in, well, fraudulent usages. So what is the role that the regulator plays? Well, the regulator authority should provide more flexibility to all these channels and provide more flexibility to financial providers under, obviously, the banking or financial regulation, as you just mentioned. And I think that two topics are the ones that I'd like to highlight. First, this allows quite a fast opening on deposit products and credit products. But, and going back to this example of bank channels or offices in Colombia, around 2 years ago, Colombia implemented, or actually the decree 222 came into force in the year 2020. And this relates to services, financial services and channels that are digital and inclusive. And one of the great innovations in that decree was to provide all the regulatory framework in relation to a new model of bank offices that in Colombia is called the mobile bank offices and the digital bank offices. But I will focus on the mobile bank offices, where I think there's a greater potential in promoting silver finances. And bank mobile offices then makes it possible that I not necessarily need to be in a physical point, but rather I can be a bank office and in a mobile manner provide those financial products and services. So this opens up two possibilities. The first possibility is for segments of different age groups to participate as also bank correspondents, and for financial services to actually be available in a much more closer manner for those that have perhaps distrusted the most the financial services. So on the first hand, we can extend or amplify these financial services and products, increase their capacity, and where we have options, we can increase those safeguarding frameworks for consumers so that they feel more trustful in using these services. All right, we have actually the pleasure of supporting you in the implementation of these bank correspondents in Colombia, and I want to congratulate you for advancing in this matter, and also the lessons learned that we've both collected or gathered in these last years. Also, bank correspondent examples are, for example, an example of Uruguay, that not necessarily is the most modern system. It doesn't have blockchain and so on. It's quite simple and sexy. It also works in the rural areas. It is a correspondence system that currently works, and we're also in cooperation with Jardino Suayo so that they can implement their system in Mexico with different cooperatives, and we would need advice from you and your lessons learned, because we're still undergoing the legal phase, because these are closed correspondence. They're not so open. I don't know if perhaps it's easier to authorize these, and that's the process we are currently in. Because, as in the Spanish system, we need these financial services in much more closeness to the final users. And if we can do this together, well, I think that will be very beneficial. Well, within the silver finance endeavors and ideas we have come up, for example, we have thought about a certification of suppliers that comply with regulatory frameworks and that could actually become available to offer financial services to seniors specifically. Perhaps that can be a useful idea about how we can regulate and protect the final consumers as well, because we want to offer this safety framework as well. Well, unfortunately, our time is over. I think some takeaway messages I've identified in terms of the financial services sector and how to care for seniors. I think we should not only see this from a perspective of, oh, we've reached this age, what should we do now? I think this should be something that people need to be aware about from younger years and how we can imagine to live our senior years. I think that this is a fundamental advice for also public policy design, how to incorporate seniority from younger ages, and perhaps not perceive life as a three-stage experience. I think the cycle, this was actually talked about in the morning. There are several moments in life, and we need to learn how to take advantage of each of these to actually reach our seniority with much more energy and just easiness to work it or live it better. So from IDB, we're fully invested in this topic. We are implementing many different practices, and what's most important is that we need to have an innovative mindset to achieve inclusion, so that we don't leave anyone behind, for us to grow together and reach our senior stage of life in the best possible way. So thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the contribution from our panelists.
Gracias por la participación en el panel Finanzas Plateadas. Ahora lo...
Thank you very much for this panel on silver finances. Now I would like to invite you to the following coffee break, and we will finish the agenda in rooms Bosque 1, 1 and 2, and also celebrate the 30 years of IDB Lab.
use above all in the startup sector? What are the implications of the use of AI? Before we get down to business, I would like to invite you all to please scan the QR code, which we will now be showing on screen. And so we would like you to help us define, or as we are currently defining, the topics that we should be focusing on to attack development issues that are relevant to us here in the region. Deal with this. The impact that artificial intelligence will have on our society will be deep, without a doubt. As humans, I don't think that we can really understand the scale and speed with which we will experience this change. Artificial intelligence. Well, actually, I have a question before we get started. Who here has already used ChatGPT? Who has used generative AI? We've seen a quantum leap here in these technologies, no? In the use of generative AI. So this is artificial intelligence which is able to create or generate text, content, etc. I really want to go into sufficient detail here because we need a good framing or background for this panel. I'd like to know, what are your thoughts about this? Why is this a historical moment that we are currently experiencing? Well, imagine that until very recently, the capacity to work with AI was in the hands of just a few. But now with generative AI, you may have seen, for example, that ChatGPT has plugins and also search engine extensions. So really, all of us have access to this. So this is an innovation explosion that will be truly impressive when it comes to the benefits that this will bring us as a society. But at the same time, will create enormous problems. What are these problems? Let me talk about just a few. What is the data that is being used to train these AI models? As you know, over history, we've done enormously important things, but we also have very biased data. And so computational models take decisions based on these embedded prejudices or biases. Right? If I'm just making decisions for myself, 3 decisions a day, those biases do not make a really big difference. But if we're talking about algorithm-based decisions, these biases could be enormously important. Also, what is the intellectual property of this data? And which jobs will disappear? So, I think that it's very important for entrepreneurs to think about the responsible use of AI when considering using it. And so when it comes to these perspectives, we have to think, for example, from an entrepreneur's perspective. So let's hear from Catalina Bernal from Quantil, who will give us her perspective. She has really researched how ecosystems work in the startup area for many years, and is also a faculty dean and has worked very, very close to startups. So let me please invite now Veneta Andonova to join us and We also have a venture capital perspective. This is VC funds that are investing in these solutions and startups for AI solutions. Well, we will hear also from Juan Eduardo Orlandi. Okay, Catalina. I think that you have been great at introducing us to some of the challenges here. What is the issue of biases when it comes to artificial intelligence? Why is this important? And what kind of biases are we starting to see in algorithms? And how are we mitigating this downside to artificial intelligence? Good afternoon. Thank you, Mara. So I'd like to first off talk about where artificial intelligence begins and how biases are embedded in these models. As you said, we have data. How data is collected is, of course, permeated by biases that we have created, even when it comes to how we collect data. And when we train AI models, this is very important to think of. Let me talk about models that are useful for decision making in any sector or in any company. One example here is for credit scoring, for credit allocation. And historically, there have been certain discriminatory relationships and patterns, and this has been in many cases unconscious. And so when our AI models learn from the data that contains these biases or prejudices, well, they perpetuate them. So the model is learning, for example, that a certain characteristic represents a loss for the company and therefore will not assign them credit. So this person will be rejected in their credit application. So basically, we are perpetuating prejudiced decision-making. Okay, there are two parts to algorithms. First off, those of you who have worked with machine learning are surely familiar with this. We, of course, want a machine that has positive performance. And so we want a well-calibrated machine that comes up with good predictions and so on and so forth. So we, of course, have to audit these machines from a technical perspective. And we have the ethical aspect. We have to identify with which demographics we are seeing these biases being perpetuated. So algorithmic audits try to identify biases using different protected variables. And these are directly connected to the sector in which the AI at hand is being used. And the other thing we try to do is to mitigate these biases. So we try to come up with alternative scenarios for these sectors without damaging the technical auditing, because of course we want to ensure positive performance but reduce these we want to reduce these biases. Of course, it could be difficult to eliminate them entirely. The IDB, since 2019, has been very aware of the risks inherent in the use of AI, and that is why we founded FairLac, which is a collaboration between the social sector and IDB Lab. And working on FairLac for many years now has been very fruitful. But last year was a great challenge when it came to finding the best solutions, at the same time attack the issue of gender discrimination in AI. And so Catalina, along with Quantil, was one of the finalists in that innovation challenge that we launched. So thank you for your perspective, Catalina. Juan, I would like to hear from you now. Those of you who invest in AI startups, well, what criteria do you use to look at the ethical criteria? So how do you approach this issue? Thank you very much. The truth is, to be honest with you, this is something really fundamental for us. We invest in early stage companies, but we have to ensure that there are tools to identify or to give us a red flag, an early warning, if the software or algorithm that the startup is using has some kind of breach of ethical guidelines. Today we haven't found an issue, but Fair Luck has an equivalent project in Chile, and basically it's very, very easily implemented by investment funds so that we can ensure that we are identifying these issues early on or any gaps that exist. Of course, it's not that the fund makes a decision to invest or not purely based on the results given by the tool, but rather we want to include this in our evaluation. That's the easy answer, but it actually gets tricky because it's also about timing, especially in early stage startups and in Latin America, because the technological gap that exists in Latin America is so large that certain startups may be founded and go through their early stage, have great traction, and then go through a seed round, and then get to an A series without incorporating AI and just use deterministic algorithms. And that is very valuable. That's how things often work in Latin America. In our first fund, which was for $290 million with over 200 companies, we had a startup. When we evaluated it, did not use, or only one, only had AI at that time. The others implemented it later. So the tool there showed us, okay, look, there's no breach, but that doesn't ensure that later on a certain company may not have an AI breach. So we need to have a longer term tool. And so in addition to evaluating startups at the beginning, that we also have some kind of commitment and long-term tool and some governance development, and really ensure that compliance guidelines are included in these startups, and that we keep this on our radar in the long term. Okay, you talked about speed. I think you've been talking about the speed with which things happen, and that's one of the things that most concerns me. It gives me a bit of vertigo, to be honest with you. And I think we have a collective difficulty when it comes to reacting to this speed. So we have this generation of entrepreneurs, for example, Mark Zuckerberg, who said, you need to break things as fast as possible. So if you're an entrepreneur working on AI, what you break could actually be society. And if you do this really quickly, we may not be able to solve this issue on time. Thankfully, we have entrepreneurs and VCs who are already thinking about how to mitigate these issues, but we have a fantastic book called Entrepreneurial Ecosystems in Unexpected Places. Many of these unexpected places are places in our region precisely. And you're talking about the role that these archetypes, these role models have, because they can really have some kind of impact on the performance and on really embedding these values in these startups. So how does this relate to AI and startups? Thank you very much. I think this is really about a way of thinking about time and the impact that AI might have. This is truly transformational. And accordingly, the capacity that we have to understand where the levers are or the role models are is a big part of what we can try to identify as molding factors for our future, because many others' behavior will depend on this. Let me talk about two different types of agents in this process. I'd like to first talk about entrepreneurs. They are motivated when it comes to the capacity to include more justice and reduce suffering in the world. and they look at using technology to work on social equity, on the environment, etc. These are themes that are arising amongst technological entrepreneurs who use AI. This is positive. Nonetheless, a lot of the time, these dreams are then being impacted and molded by other actors in the ecosystem who don't have that same clarity and conscience when it comes to auditing and ethical values, as well as the impact itself of these tools in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. This is an issue. I'm talking here about corporations that frequently acquire these startups, and they oftentimes lack this ethical perspective. They have financial KPIs. They're much more focused on the business core, and accordingly, whatever is not obligatory or compulsory is not included. And these are many of the aspects that we are talking about here. Ethics, for example, are things that become nice to have but not necessary. What I'm trying to get at is that we have to educate the corporate sector and create a much more acute awareness and really move forward with, I think, encouraging entrepreneurs who have such a positive outlook. We also have to talk to, I think, VC funds, because they have an investment logic that does not necessarily include, i.e., ethics. I do agree with you, and I think it's even worse, because you're talking about corporations as if they were colder, and perhaps that is somewhat true, but startups as well, because startups have a lot of resource pressure. So if you go to them and you say, look, your algorithm has a compliance issue. I mean, it's great that you're trying to work on social justice and so on and so forth, but only to the degree that this doesn't affect profitability. So whether it's a startup or a corporation, even if you already have investors, you really lose the right to make important decisions, because it becomes about cash flow. Bringing entrepreneurs and venture capital to workshops where we train them on the use of our tool, we have to use their drivers. In Chile, we do not have yet a norm or a regulation around the use of AI. So no one is coming to tell you what to do or to put the brakes on. And we have a lot of small Chilean startups that want to become international. And so there are important repercussions also for international success. There are some venture capital funds, and I'm referring, of course, to the tool that is being launched by IDB Lab. Two of the funds, the minority, we were in the minority, who said, look, my stakeholders are asking me to develop a tool to be able to analyze and evaluate the ethical compliance of startups, but there's nothing available. And so very few other funds were willing to participate in the pilot project.
Okay, I'm going to seize this opportunity to perhaps introduce this next comment. In the last months, we've seen how, on the one hand side, all these different self-assessment and algorithmic auditing tools have been launched from the same entrepreneurs, and even tech companies have started to develop within their own clouds architectures that allow you to see if you have biases and so on. And at the same time, we're seeing the rise of, for example, the letter that was recently published, where the same designers of these generative language models are basically requesting a pause of 6 months in development to reflect on how to really gauge the impacts that are going to occur. Even European parliamentary members manifested on driving the AI Act and actually forbid the categorized, for example, and accepted risk proposals. So would you believe that all these self-regulation ideas are effective? Do we really need, for example, a moratorium? or a deferment, or perhaps a regulation on what can be done, what should be done, what shouldn't be done? All right, I'd like to perhaps respond first. I think it's quite a dichotomy, and we've actually thought about it from the market's perspective, right? The market that we provide auditing services to. Well, if we offer this as a service, if we speak about a specific market and we understand that there's a regulation or a norm framework for companies to feel obliged to this, or should we expect that the creators of these models of AI ethically sit down and reflect upon this exercise and perhaps realize that they may be infringing some ethical thresholds? Well, I think my understanding is that I think from the algorithmic auditing side, we've actually discussed this and how to define what's ethical in this sector, because, for example, an entrepreneur can say, look, my company, and under the ethics of my company, well, we do comply with universal ethics, but there are so many subjective concepts to ethics. Perhaps for this person, it's non-acceptable that their company, for example, has employees from certain races, and for an employee that's okay, but from another scope perhaps we should seek equity in terms of gender, age, etc. So I believe that the regulatory framework is not only necessary to define what's ethic, but also we need to go beyond about this definition. I think that I just wanted to touch upon this challenge of defining what's ethical. I'd like to contribute as well. So I believe that there are several risks, and I will share two ideas around this. The first one, if we define the ethical usage of AI on data as a need, this will oblige us to reflect upon this topic and to have norms, processes, and actually do something about it. I believe that this is a very positive proposal, and as many of my colleagues have mentioned, in the VC world and in the investor world, no one wants to be the evil character. Everyone wants to be ethical, right? And the good character of the film. Obviously, no one wants to willfully do what's incorrect, but if we create certain incentives, then I believe that this can help, not necessarily because we will have a standard. I think the standard will never exist. I think this is an ongoing process. I think exploration will go beyond our capabilities of legislating and make some laws be complied with. And I think that competing with the space of technology is impossible. And for policymakers to understand at the same pace with developers, I think it's impossible. So I think there's an underlying risk, which is the following. If we start legislating on result and not on the principles, if we start to become too prescriptive, then we are assuming that we understand how all the direct and indirect channels of our actions actually manifest, and this can lead us to absolute perverse results. And if we do not acknowledge our naiveness, our ingenuity in leading this legislative process, I think we will be leading ourselves to a very, very obscure world where I would not like to be.
Estoy de acuerdo con eso, totalmente.
I agree with this. And what has occurred in development in terms of ethical principles is something I've quite liked, because I'd say that there's a certain convergence between different entities, such as the IDB, the European Commission, the Standards and Technology Organization, but there's not really a priority on how to define each. And I think that this is a healthy process versus saying, okay, we have a clarity on what to do and we will create this legislation. Why? Because policymakers have been very, very slow in doing so. And the tech world goes at another pace. Now, in relation to the need, or if perhaps this idea of forbidding or stopping the use or the development of this tool makes sense, which has been quite polemic recently, I personally believe that not only it's absolutely unfeasible, but it's actually quite negative because, well, I'll expose two reasons. One, What's happening is healthy. The speed at which it's advancing and the potential we're seeing, it's quite vertiginous. But it's clear that we're at an early stage and that it's necessary the society to be exposed to it, because then case studies that feed that revolution are also positive. If ChatGPT weren't developed, and there are many other things such as deepfakes and these instant calls that can now actually forge the voice of your family members, if all these things weren't happening right now, and we weren't actually exchanging about these different events, as a society, we would be perhaps missing out on the opportunity of actually preparing ourselves, educating ourselves about what's up to come and how strong the impact can be. If we just say, okay, this model has a lot of potential and we forbid it and pause it and no one uses ChatGPT, we now have the perfect regulation and then we launch the model. I don't think we would be prepared for the possible outcomes as a society. And to your question, if these self-assessment models are sufficient, I think they will never be. And I think that one of the key elements of seeing this in the near future is this automated reality, right? And it's perhaps a audit fire with fire risk. Because although there's regulation, it's unfeasible to actually enforce this through audit. So I think we should aim to have models have an AAP or some feature that so that agencies that surveil this, as the ones that were discussed when, for example, Sam Altman was in the Congress of the US, of creating, for example, supervising agencies, they should have a special key to actually be able to enter all systems and to be able to carry automated auditing. I like what you just mentioned about this pace of the change and how never legislation will never be able to keep up. And perhaps this leads me to this phrase, which is each invention creates its own accident. For example, ship wreckages wouldn't have existed if ships hadn't existed in the first place. And this incredible technology we've developed has already created or is already creating a series of events that we could have hardly anticipated. And in deep computing and robotics, just recently we've been ruled by Isaac Asimov's three principles. That is the pace at which technology is advancing. And we as a society are trying to, and I think this is where the most complex topic lays, how to agree on the governance model of this technology. Because I think the difficulty is how to agree to govern technology. This implies that we should have a model of a society that we would like to preserve, and how, in the case of a technology that will be at the reach and at the hand of all global population, how can we create a set of values that we want to preserve and that are common to all of us, and to then legislate in that direction. Actually, yesterday, a letter of European researchers was published, and they talked about European sovereignty, and their main concern is that we're feeding these models, right, with data of all models that have been created overall by great actors of technology, the technological industry in the US, that basically model AI so that it can perpetuate a model of a society that is not at all inclusive. And that leads me to my next question. What actors do you think should act or should be part of this governance of the future? Well, we always talk about this public, private, and academic triangle model, and it makes sense. But in this triangle, when we talk about the public sector, we refer to the state. However, we feel that the non-visible actor is the general public, because right now I feel that in the circles, which are quite a niche, people don't really know, and I feel there's a great task before us to raise awareness and educate on these topics. because once this happens, the general audience has the power of actually mobilizing the market. And then going back to the drivers that are quite cold, right? The ones who are developing this. If the market is not demanding, how are you going to justify this unless that this is a free founder? How do you justify this to your investors and your stakeholders that, I don't know, you're doing X or Y, and even less in the corporate world, unless the market demands it. So some of the topics that was actually discussed in Congress is that, for example, never human beings should interact with AI without actually knowing that they're interacting with AI. This is something that should be implemented anyways. There's, I think, a good and a negative example in Chile that was has been now in past. It's in force. All supermarket products, for example, should have a seal if their sodium or sugar levels surpass a threshold. People buy it anyway because, despite seeing the label, they're ignorant to the effects that these ingredients can generate in their health. Human behavior is like this. So if we don't achieve this in the general audience, I believe that we will be perhaps leaving aside the actor that has the greatest power to actually mobilize the market in the correct way. So the question is, who are the actors that should participate? Well, I'd like to complement Juan's response, and it's perhaps this pressure that certain sectors of the population can create. Perhaps those sectors of the population that can feel most affected, even without the use of AI. For example, a group of a specific sector feels threatened because this type of AI can perhaps substitute them. That is exactly where the demand can create either a regulatory pressure towards the public sector, the legislative branch, or an adoption of a technology, a parallel technology that can perhaps help to complement knowledge in that specific profession, be it so that they adopt the technology that can favor them, or to fully forbid the technology in that specific sector. So a very short example is, for example, teaching. If teachers feel absolutely vulnerable, right, through this tool because everybody has access to open knowledge, or so teachers can adopt the technology to complement their teaching profession or forbid it fully in their classroom. So when you think about teachers, well, ChatGPT, for example, is forbidden to be used, for example, for a university essay. So I think that must be rethought. Should I use it or should I forbid it? I will ask another question and then I'll hand the floor to the audience so that they can share their questions. So whomever has a question, just please raise your hand. A tech support person will give you a mic and then you can ask away. Well, let's give the example. Vehicles did not have seatbelts before. Now it would be absolutely unthinkable to not wear or fasten your seatbelt if you're in the highway at over 100 kilometers per hour. So algorithmic seals, quality seals, would be to AI what a seatbelt is to a car. What do you think about that? Do you think that these potential incentives for AI to develop could perhaps help AI be developed in a fair way? Well, I believe that creating guidelines to channel a conversation can perhaps lead us to a desirable place. I do believe in incentives. I think incentives do work. And I believe we need to take a stand in relation to the uses of ethical principles and AI. I feel that's absolutely necessary. Now, having said this, I also believe that we have not yet talked about the most important actor behind AI, which is a person, individuals, the individuals who are behind the production, not only of data, but also of the algorithms. So what I want to convey is the following. The regulation topic must concern us, but I think we should be more concerned about the studies that are proving an involution of our cognitive and human capabilities. And I will refer to a very recent study from Northwestern on the IQ topic, where in all dimensions except for one, human intelligence dimensions are basically reducing the parameters in which we have been measuring human capacity in a historical manner. So I don't believe we're quite understanding how our agency is developing our emotional, cognitive, and intellectual capabilities in relation to these tools, because I believe that education and raising awareness, that Katarina has mentioned, well, if we understand education as the place where we need to literally fill our minds with just events and data, of course, this model absolutely failed. But I don't think that's the case. So there is a need to rethink the role of individuals and human capabilities and capacity within the society, which is absolutely different to what the education industry has understood as a standard education. Remember, we have been in the business of literally building soldiers for the corporate world for many decades, and we need to change this because there is a capacity that certainly creates more effective invisible soldiers for the corporate world. Well, I think this topic has been absolutely fascinating, and it has to do with impact in human cognitive capabilities and, well, the extensive theory that touches upon all these different concepts that you just exposed. But I want to hear you. I know that there was one person raising their hand.
¿No?
Buenas tardes, fascinante.
Good afternoon. This conversation has been absolutely thrilling. My name is Oscar Barbeira. Well, right now we are developing different kinds of engines. Well, this is a topic that I think is cross-cutting, and I don't believe regulation will exist soon, or a more comprehensive regulation. I have a question. So from the outside, I think we're perhaps considering this an additional technology. However, this is a technology that is substantially different to all technologies we have coexisted with until now. So we must take into account the following question: what will happen to the human being? I think you were touching upon this in the last interventions. I mean, we already have these tools in the market, and we should already have results that show us clear red flags and perhaps touch upon the change in human behavior. What can we think when we start to perceive that certain sectors are already being deeply influenced by these tools? I apologize. My question is, what should we do?
Queremos recoger
Okay. Wait, Veneta, would you like to respond to this question? Okay, let's do a round of questions, 2 more, and then we'll respond. And then we'll all answer at the same time here. Hello, thank you. There are many voices and knowledges that are not included in the data collected. For example, knowledge from the indigenous sector or rural areas. We know that due to bias, these voices and views are not included. How can we ensure that these perspectives are included? I mean, we know this is a defect. What is the technique for us to include this additional data? Okay. So the first question is for Veneta, and the second one for Kata. Hi, I am Elias. I have a perhaps more philosophical question. The panel is called The Future of a Responsible AI. But what we see currently, is what we see currently irresponsible? You've spoken a lot about biases or prejudices. I mean, those existed before the internet was invented. We've always had prejudice. So perhaps I have a bias coming from the startup sector because I see that this is an enormous opportunity. And I mean, I think since time immemorial, human beings have found the best and the worst of whatever the current technology is. So are we using the same logic, or do you see that this may be much more complex than other types of technologies. The internet has been around for how long? I don't remember now. And it's become something that can be negative in the educational sphere just recently. Okay, let's get down to business. Veneta, do you have the question noted down? Human beings, right? That's right. That's what I have noted down. I think there are two dimensions that I would like to suggest we think through. First off, we have to look at intelligence as the capacity to absorb data. That's one perspective, but I think that that's an obsolete way of thinking. And in fact, it's about data processing. ChatGPT really creates new spaces that are very uninspiring, but I'm sure it will eventually provide us with some kind of innovative perspective. But what I think is that we need to really focus on human agency beyond understanding humans as a simple repository for information and data processing. I think if you look at the sector that I work in, which is the educational sector, our ability to help people to have emotional control and cognitive control and help humans to build and make a meaning based on the way that they live their lives and avoid extreme emotional fragility that we see amongst new generations who are now entering our universities. That is the task that we really need to deal with. We need to help people find a purpose in life. We need positive emotions. We need optimism. The conversations that say, for example, the world and our lives are over because of climate change and because of these new technologies is really to the detriment of our youths. I must say this. We need to look at ourselves as humans and value ourselves as humans who also bear humanity as something beyond simple, machines. That's my first part of the answer. Okay, then we came to more inclusive AI. We have just one more answer and then we'll have to close. I am sorry. Okay, let me talk about data capture. I will give you an unsatisfactory answer, and that is it depends. What do you want to use this information for? And I will also take advantage of this space to give some advice. I think that the responsibility when it comes to the development of artificial intelligence is related to the data that feeds into this AI. Many startups and many companies in general base their operations on public data, for example. But we have the responsibility to question where this data comes from. Many times these biases are due to the fact because the data capture methodologies are biased themselves. So we had a model in the company to predict crime, and one of the criteria was how to define what a suspicious person looks like. And it could simply be one person saying about another person, that guy who just walked by looks very suspicious. So what do you want to use your data for? Where will this data be taken from? From open source data? Because that's widely available on the internet in general. And if that is your intention, and if you have a clear objective behind your data use, then what you need to do is to ensure that you complement information with true granularity. And so when it comes to data science, and I'm here talking about personal experience at work, is that there's a whole lot of open information that may include minutiae. For example, what kind of activities do people carry out in indigenous reserves? And there could be, for example, open source satellite images that could be used to identify certain behavioral patterns in, for example, indigenous economies. And so, when it comes to capturing data, we also have to look at the lens through which we capture data. So if you focus on identifying certain demographics needs, then you will of course find a way to reach indigenous communities, carry out surveys, and have better information. So the advantage is that we can manipulate non-structured data, for example, images and text, to serve whatever kind of model, or structured data from a survey, for example. So it's really about how you capture data. Okay, I'll take the philosophical question. Human beings are a product of nature, and so anything that comes from us is also natural. That's my philosophical answer. Personally, I agree that all of our prior technological revolutions also created a great deal of fear. And in fact, when it comes to being replaced at work, I have a distinct perspective. I don't think that ChatGPT will replace us. AI will not replace us. We will see rather new jobs created because they'll take over certain tasks. That's why I work on what I work on. But also as a technology investor, I have great faith that once again we will be able to face and deal with the challenges that arise as a result of this new technology. And we have to make sure that we are as inclusive as possible in our process. Let's hope that in the future we do not have to talk about responsible AI versus other types of AI, right? We are just at the helm of all of this, and it is the right time to have this conversation so that we can take action together. And at Fairlack, we are really worried about how we are going to improve citizens' competencies so that they know how to appropriately deal with this technology and have, for example, personalized medical and educational services to generate positive impact as long as we make the best use possible of this technology. Please follow the Fairlack initiative run by the IDB. Thank you for your time, and thank you to the whole panel.
Bueno, voy a ir empezando, si les parece.
All right, I'll start. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Ignacio Peña, and today I'll talk about, or I'd rather want to invite you to think beyond what we're perhaps used to think about. In the last 10 years, LATAM created a very powerful ecosystem of startups, tech startups. And for the first time in history, we're creating tech startups at scale. But if we analyze, most of these digital startups are apps that are mainly focused in areas such as e-commerce, fintech, and logistics. So my invitation is for us to think beyond that, beyond apps, beyond what we know. And as we will see, this is really important because we need to go beyond so that we can provide responses to the challenges in the region and the challenges in the world. And I'll make a pause to now wait for my presentation. I think now we have it. So, to invite you to think, or rather give you the baseline to think about this possible future, we've developed a study that was sponsored by the IDB Lab as main sponsor, but also by a series of funds, specialized funds in deep tech. And this study basically shows this new wave of tech innovation that is mainly made by deep tech startups, which I will further explain. The funds that sponsored, aside from the IDB Lab, that should be mentioned are Air Capital, GridX, Draper Cygnus, this report is available. I will give you the QR code to access it later. And once again, this is an invitation for you to think beyond what we are used to think. This is an invitation to think beyond apps and think about deep tech, a new wave of innovation arising in LATAM. This study, or rather what I will present today, are the main conclusions and takeaway messages of a study that we developed in the recent months with IDB Lab, Air Capital, Draper Cygnus, GridX, CITES, the Ganesha Lab, Lab Venture Builder, Deloitte, and Surfing Tsunamis, who developed the study, but it wouldn't have been possible without the generosity of all these institutions that betted to develop the study of the ecosystem in such a generous way. So, if we analyze the world, we have a series of problems that are quite concerning if we especially think about our children and the future generations. Problems such as indebtment, geopolitical tension, financial crises, population aging, and other problems that affect the planet, such as climate change, dramatic, extreme weather events such as drought, deforestation, problems that we all are very much aware of and that we don't have a solution for. And to gain perspective, we need to realize that solution cannot be incremental. It needs to be radical. Why? Because by the year 2030, we will consume, or rather we will need 2 Earths to sustain our current standard of living. If we'd like to take everyone to a US standard of living, we would need 5 Earths, and we don't have those. Actually, we need to heal the world, remediate the damage we've caused. So we don't need 5 Earths. We need perhaps a times 10. So that means that we need to rethink our food supply chain, energy, health, and this is only possible with deep tech. So what is deep tech? The deep tech concept was developed in 2014 by Swati Chaturvedi, investor of PropelX. Basically, she was supporting startups that were going beyond that point. These were startups that were based in scientific discoveries or in great engineering innovation and that sought responses to the great world's challenges. These startups are startups that are developing not only product innovation, not only seeking a product market fit, but also taking a technological risk. They're creating technologies that when they start, they don't really know if they will work. Quite different from for example, designing a web page. And what we're seeing is an explosion of deep tech technologies at a worldwide level. Technologies such as solar panels that will enable us to have 10 times cheaper energy than we currently have. AI that is now changing our lives. Nuclear fusion that will allow us to create abundant and clean energy. Flying taxis. Reusable bridges, biotechnology that allows us to cure cancer, cure the main diseases of humanity. Humanoid robots that will change the way in which we produce products, vehicles, electric vehicles or autonomous vehicles, all these technologies that respond to this great challenge before us of making sustainable development a reality. And the sustainable development must occur in 3 axes, and in the economic, social, and environmental ones. However, what we know is that today we have a very short timeline. We think about climate change, we need to think about, okay, what do we do about the people who have been left behind? How do we make it so the cost of this doesn't imply then that I am now under the line of poverty? With these technologies, we can face those challenges, and we can not only do that, we can really imagine a future where we solve all these different challenges at the same time. Let's think about solar energy that is 10 times cheaper than the current one, that will allow us to grow economically, create jobs, and for those people that don't have access to energy or products created with that energy, actually have it. But we would have a 10 times smaller carbon footprint than we currently have. And as we've seen, there are dozens of technologies that allows us to redefine the frontier of development. LATAM can, and I think should, be an early adopter of new technologies. There are specific examples that manifest that this is possible. In Costa Rica, for example, they've attracted a new manufacturing and testing plant. They're also exporting knowledge services. Or Uruguay, and how it became a leading wind energy adopter that were developed in other countries. Chile is now a world leader in solar energy adoption in the world, reaching 17% of penetration. Or Colombia, Bogota, this city. It is a city with the largest bus fleet outside of China, with more than 1,500 e-buses, as well as Mexico. Mexico has recently adopted the largest product of Tesla to develop last generation vehicles, and they've done these with humanoid robots. Not only with humanoid robots, but also with 3,500 people that will work in this plant that basically provide a competitive advantage. So we are thinking about, or we could consider, a reindustrialization of LATAM. Aside from adopting these technologies, we can take a step even further. Let's think about all the companies that can be created with all different value or propositions with AI, or creating industries such as, let's take AI, for example, to lower costs of training developers, and that can be much more productive than actual developers, human developers, because they use AI. And with this, we can create in the next 10 years' time 4 million jobs and over $100 billion in service exports with deep tech innovation. We can also use AI to improve the lives of low-income citizens. Let's think about, for example, this senior lady in the Andes and her life improving with not only using mobile device, but also with financial services and e-commerce. But let's imagine what it can mean to have a social assistant based on AI, or, for example, legal assistant based on AI, or translation assistants to provide much more productivity, for example, to her small farm, or assistance to create a business or even to design a web page. All this for free. These technologies allow people to empower themselves and thus democratize formal services that are not available now for the most vulnerable ones. That is why the UN, in its last study on technology and innovation, is urgently calling those emerging countries to really rise up to this wave and to be able to leapfrog into the future, using these technologies, the most efficient ones and the ones that create more jobs. And that's why the First Minister of India, that surely understands about poverty, is saying that technology is what empowers the most vulnerable people, and that is certainly the way to solve poverty. We can also create startups that create new technologies in LATAM. For example, adoption, building upon technologies that come from other places, and creating new technologies. And actually, a large portion of the agenda. Certified investors think that this is too expensive, it takes too long, it's too risky, and it is too difficult. Why? Because they're looking at LATAM with a certain perspective. The difference is that these startups create innovations that actually serve the world. So we need to think in a different way. So the founders of OutZero, well, this is a startup that was created in the year 2015. I met them at that time, actually, and they created a startup, the most successful startup of deep tech in the region, a cybersecurity startup with a solution of user identification that is now supported by OpenAI for ChatGPT. These people created a startup that, after 5 years, was sold for $600 million. So it's certainly possible to create solutions that can revolutionize the world. But aside from this, we're creating deep tech startups at scale for the first time in history in Latin America and Caribbean. For example, Establishment Labs, one of the most expensive startups based in Costa Rica. They basically design biomedical devices, specifically breast implants, and they have already 5 patents. They produce these breast implants with a minimum invasive surgery, and a woman who will undergo this procedure basically can undergo the procedure and go back home the same day. Bioceres, for example, they develop wheat seeds that can endure drought. Notco, they produce, perhaps you know them, they produce food products using AI and plants to replace animal-based products with less environmental impact and also very tasteful. STEM, they are creating bioreactors that will change manufacturing already around the world, 60% much more efficient than current ones. Satellogic, they already have 7 satellites observing the world and surrounding Earth with an advantage of cost of 10 times in comparison to their competitors. Or Molec, they're designing seeds that allow you to produce animal protein using plants. And this is happening because now it's easier than ever to use, or rather to develop deep tech startups from Latin America, not only because we have successful cases, because we have attractive valuations, also we have a huge talent pool that we can develop through decades, for example, through the IDB Lab, through scientific systems. So we have at our service a pool of human talent that can certainly be used to improve innovations around the world. We have cost advantages, we have a faster and more agile innovation cycles. We have conditions that are very similar to those of other countries, and we have a massive opportunity of disruption. I just want to challenge this idea that it's very expensive. Latin America has a cost advantage of 5 to 10 times of what would. So developing a deep tech startup in LATAM costs from 5 to 10 times less than developing it in the developed world. So you can basically create jobs that is better paid and that is more attractive, and creating a very competitive startup at a worldwide level. Of course, they will perhaps disappear over time because people will want to earn more money, but now it's a reality. And if we can also gain good returns. For example, farm product producers that gather together and created a scientific startup in Argentina. Each of these invested $600, and now its current value is $1 million for the case of Bioceres first round. Or, for example, the SOSVs that were talked about in the conference yesterday are obtaining a return on investment of 72% gross annual return. Today, we already have 14 lakh countries that are already creating deep tech startups. That means that all countries can participate. And we have countries that are quite at the cutting edge of this. For example, Costa Rica, as I mentioned, have the most valuable startup, representing 22% of the value of these startups at a regional level, with only 5 million inhabitants. That proves that any country can do this. This is a revolution that is an easy access for everyone. In the case of Costa Rica, for example, we see the same case in Brazil, Argentina, and Chile, but other countries are following, and these have great potential. Colombia, Mexico, Brazil has perhaps a non-achievable potential. Uruguay as well, with 2 dedicated funds for deep tech startups. And so what we see is an ecosystem that already has a very rich and complex network of interactions between startups and investors. At the center, we have these red dots that represent specialized investors in deep tech. And as you've seen, they have funded many startups such as GridX or Startup Labs. And outside of the ecosystem, all these small diamond shapes are the startups. On the outer part, we have international funds represented in yellow, such as CITES, that has so many connections, or Startup Chile. And in the upper part, we have generalist investors from LAC that have invested in dozens of these startups. Now we have 3 types of investors in the region: specialized investors in deep tech, investors of the region that invest occasionally in deep tech, as well as global investors that occasionally invest in startups in LATAM. And this revolution covers a wide range of sectors. The most dominant one is biotechnology, due to the integration with existing value chains, as well as human capital. But we also see other sectors such as medical devices, artificial intelligence, space tech, clean tech, robotics, advanced mobility, nanotechnology. The growth potential is phenomenal. In the next decade, we can expect a 20 times growth potential. This based on historical records of LATAM and the world. And in the long term, a 100 times long-term or 100-fold long-term growth potential. There are already 1 million people dedicated to research in universities in this deep tech sector, also with a very low penetration of venture capital in this sector. To capitalize this, we need, or rather to boost it, we need a new layer of infrastructure, such as incubators and accelerators. We also need R&D, innovation districts, free trade zones, as well as electric power grids and storage to transmit clean energies, education infrastructure, digital infrastructure, as well as EV charging infrastructure for electric vehicles. And this is something that the IDB and the governments can hugely contribute to develop. So we thought it was expensive. Actually, it's quite the contrary. We have an advantage in terms of cost. We thought that the timelines were not compatible with venture capital. They are. We see that there are funds acting now in this sector and that are being successful. We thought that the risk was too high, and what we have proven is that, on the contrary, as these startups have a lower cost, are much more resilient and are better enabled to navigate in quite a turbulent world. We thought that we can't do it, and I just proved to you that it's possible. And not only can we do it, we can certainly have huge impact at a worldwide level and create a lot of value. This means that for now, we focused on 9%, at least in the US, 9% in the digital economy. But what about the other 91% that we still haven't tapped on or transformed? and that we can transform with deep tech. So my invitation to you is, as I've previously said, for us to think beyond apps and to think about how we can transform that 91% of the economy to solve the global population's problems. This study is available by scanning these QR codes, and these will be my final words.
Invitamos a Marcelo Cabrol.
We will now invite Marcelo Cabrol to the stage. He is the head of knowledge scalability and impact at IDB Lab. We also invite Matías Peire, Rocío Fonseca, and Cristian Marín Müller to the panel. We're just going to rearrange a little. This is a fantastic opportunity to be able to talk about the future. So, of course, we're here to evangelize a little. I would like to have the opportunity, first off, for each panelist to introduce themselves, and then we'll have a lot to talk about. Okay, let me start. I'm Matías Peire. I am the founder of GridX, a venture capital fund. We focus on company building with a regional focus and technology. We have 56 companies in our portfolio, and we want to reach 100. We see enormous potential. Welcome, Matías. Rocío Fonseca. I used to be in charge of Startup Chile, which was our startup agency. So if you have questions related to that, please go ahead. But I am now working on an investment fund focused mainly on deep tech. The interpreter apologizes. The microphone is not switched on, and I am not able to hear Cristian. I apologize, Cristian, we are not hearing you. Okay, let me take this one. Thank you. I am Cristian Marín Müller. I have a doctorate in molecular biology, and I am the director in Spiratum. We work on nanotechnology for new therapies against cancer. Thank you, Cristian. Let me start with the easy question, so to speak. Do you believe Nacho's pitch? Let me explain. Do you think that this is the time to act? Obstacles can be overcome, and this is something that Latin America can really leverage. Do you agree with that? Let me start with you, Rocío, because you're looking at me with a face of, what are you talking about? No, 100%, I do agree. Okay, so putting on my ex-public servant hat, we have more than 10,000 innovations carried out, and the most profitable of those are deep tech innovations. So if you really zoom in on profitability, it's not only economic profitability, but also social and environmental profitability. So the startups that we are creating also involve a certain mindset shift. So Ignacio, let me zoom in on some data that I'm familiar with from my previous job. And if a company is led by women, it will be 20% more profitable. Just so you're aware. What are we lacking? Social capital. We have talent, we have natural resources, we have investments, but we need to really get out of the comfort zone. I think that we are missing social capital. But we really need to fight for this. In Miami a few years ago, we spoke about this, right? What is the effort required? And what does it really mean to put together an investment fund that focuses on these matters? And as Nacho would say, getting close to where you were just 2 years ago. It is still difficult. We still have challenges that we face. And We're here to talk about what's happening in the world and the opportunity at hand. It's very important to do this because this raises awareness about the opportunities. There's a historical perspective on technology which lets us get excited about these new technologies, because until just a few years ago, maybe even 10 years ago at least, it was very hard to have material and infrastructure access in Latin America to be sufficiently competitive against other countries. But now it's a flat earth, so to speak. It's much more accessible. And we have technologies that enable us to move forward with these kinds of developments. And other technologies related to AI. This is enabling support for the evolution of our technologies for the better of our planet. This is happening. And we have the necessary knowledge foundations to be able to access these tools. And if we can really take advantage of this, it will be enormously beneficial. Every year we see more evidence and more proof of this value. We see more concrete value. And so Latin America has a hard time taking this leap, but I think that we're reaching every year a new height. Thank you, Matthias. Christian, I'd like a really concrete but at the same time very general answer. There are two things I'd like to ask you. First off, about your company. As I asked Matthias about his journey with the fund, I'd like to know about your company first off, but I'd also like to know about Costa Rica. Costa Rica seems like a role model. It is obviously a small country in terms of market and population, yet you have a seat at the table. So that's 2 for 1. So when I brought the company from the US, where I was studying these cutting-edge technologies, and bring them to Latin America, it was very important for me to focus on Costa Rica. I realized that there we have the necessary human talent, an enormously important talent pool, fantastic scientists with great creativity, and we can be as innovative as anyone else anywhere around the world. So it was an obvious choice to bring this project to Costa Rica because of the human talent. Costa Rica has, for many decades now, also been making the necessary fiscal developments to enable bringing new technologies to the country. We have different free trade agreements for export these technologies, for the export of these technologies. And so I think that is a great invitation for these technologies to be developed in the country. We've also got a great educational tradition spanning decades, so we have well-trained human talent. We need great precision, a very innovative approach, and this has created an ecosystem for these kinds of developments to become what they have. Did you have any doubts? Yes, of course, especially at the beginning. I was in the US, and I was working at the university there. I was doing well, and at the beginning I had a lot of doubts. I said, oh, I don't know if these kinds of developments could be carried out in Costa Rica necessarily. But we decided to really roll up our sleeves and see if it was the right place to do things. And the surprise was not only could it be done, but also these numbers that were shown by Ignacio, 5 to 7 times less. It costs us 5 to 7 times less than it would have done to continue in Houston, where we started out initially. We've had a lot of these doubts because we hear a lot from the market. Why will Latin American scientists be more competitive than others? You know? And we have to say, look, because they publish in international peer-reviewed journals, they study overseas, etc. Those doubts exist. I will come back to that, Rocio. Isn't there a myth that I mean, we spoke about this earlier, Rocio, but there's this also myth that we have to wait too long to get things done here. Well, I always talk about social capital and culture. We come from an extractive, natural resource-based economy here in Latin America, very low added value. And we've had that same perspective and matrix for a long time now. There's great talent, but the talent operates in silos. And this is why I really love startups, because the idea is to start to break down barriers and connect. For example, if you go to universities that are simply focused on publishing papers instead of a higher purpose, well, that's no good thing. I think the academic sector still demonizes working with the private sector a little bit. So talent does exist, but I think we are a little closed off. So perhaps the new generation will look to further connect with the rest of the world, where science and business can come together and generate real impact. But we've taken a long time to get there. And I think especially with what we are experiencing around the world, this is a game changer that we have on our hands. And we have to take charge, because if not, we are going to be in trouble. Wait, does it take 10 years to get this done? No. I think it does. We've discussed this quite a lot. There is biotech that is already industrial, technological developments that might take only 2 to 3 years to take to market. So we need to also demystify this. Yes, there is deep tech that takes 10, 15 years to go to market. But there are other innovations that are much quicker. I think that we have to walk hand in hand in parallel to achieve important goals and advances. Matthias, at BID, we work with the whole IDB Group, especially with the public sector, and we've seen great work being done by the public sector, especially with research and development and ecosystems. How can we complement that with what we are talking about right now, which is the possibility of entrepreneurship and investment? We have to be proud of what we have developed in the region. We have very, very high quality scientists. We have a system that truly responds. And the IDB and other agents have been fantastic in coordinating these kinds of efforts in Latin America. But now we need to take the next step. And the next step is to look at how this knowledge and this talent pool and the systems that exist can continue to produce knowledge, and in doing so, contribute development to the region. Okay, wait. I don't know if I agree. Let me ask something further. So investments in the public sector, there's this idea that they are crowding out what we do in the private sector, or that the private sector should not be working with the public sector. What do you think in terms of the complementarity? Okay. That's quite a profound question to answer. We have to think about the capacity that each sector has. The public sector has demonstrated that it can produce knowledge through education and through other knowledge production systems, for example, science. And the private sector, of course, has the necessary capacities to transform this knowledge into real impact, because it has a true understanding, or let's say survives on the back of the true impact that this knowledge can produce. And so it's about building a bridge. Sometimes the public sector wants to be part of the transformation and knowledge using market logic, and that's very difficult. Sometimes the private sector also has trouble understanding public sector logic. And so I think here this is a challenge that we need to face. We have to really unlock this potential, because we have the necessary knowledge. As has already been said, the most necessary element here is human capital, and that has already been produced, been built over decades. So we have to connect these conversations, and so that we have a clear perspective on what each sector has to offer and how they can complement each other. Thank you very much. That's great to hear and very important for us. Christian. Rocio said something quite controversial just a moment ago. Let me see if you agree. How can we get the scientific community that has perhaps a less applied practice and research closer to what we want to do? What advice would you give, or what would you do so that more of your colleagues take that advice on board and leave these negative ideas to the side? Innovation is born of basic science. So it's very important that we continue to invest in basic science, of course. But these creative ideas do not become innovations until they are applied. And for that to happen, we need to overcome the fear that we have as researchers, get into the business world, get in contact with the sector, and not be afraid to build teams and network. And we need to see if there's something that can truly change the world and be applied. It's extremely important that we unblock our minds, so to speak, and that we really get rid of this idea that it's impossible to do science outside of the academy. Okay, but is this something related to the industrial organization of universities, incentives? What is the real root of the problem? It's about a cultural change. It's about a mindset shift. Let's not see the private sector, the commercial sector, as something separate. Of course, then is the issue of changing how universities incentivize these activities, that they do not focus only on the production of science to publish papers, but also patents, that they also launch startups, and that if these startups fail, that this be a metric to try again, to try and move forward with these ideas. This should have the same value as the same points as publishing a number of papers. We have to change this mentality so that we can truly be a point of focus for technological development. Okay, Rocio, what do you have to say? Beyond public policy and changing legislation, etc., I think that with just small demonstrations of the willingness to overcome these obstacles and drop down our guard, we'll see great results. Researchers, for example, a biotech entrepreneur who's willing to work with the private sector could be enormously important. At universities, there's a lot of infrastructure and technology to be used. A lot of the time, these facilities are not being properly used. But imagine having the right controls in place and opening the doors of universities for these tools to be used. Imagine putting a researcher at the forefront of a startup. And then we'll start to see this domino effect that can be multiplies. But I think that it is about also putting ego to the side, working on culture, and facing the challenge. Perhaps as a university or a startup, that have the same goal in mind. Let's say something related to food security or health. I think it's easier than it looks, but we just end up navel-gazing and not doing anything. Matthias, let's talk again about investments and investors. There are new players on the scene, but what are the barriers that you see? What are the problems at hand? You referred to this a little at the beginning, but I'd like to hear more from you. Well, I think that Nacho showed the players on the scene very well. If we look at the number of investors in Latin America, well, I mean, that's really a very, very small drop in the ocean, those who are interested in deep tech. But we cannot deny this is a huge opportunity in deep tech. And we can learn from Latin America. We have to understand the venture capital dynamic that could work with these funds, looking at deep tech partially or entirely. While we are working in venture capital, we have different investment theses and mandates, different investment teams who will demand different things. But basically, venture capital investors are going to have to adapt. Sometimes we say that in venture capital, there is a temptation to get close to deep tech, but they want to adapt startups to the metrics that are necessary for them to be able to justify an investment, for example, an earlier sales contraction for the users. And sometimes startups are forced to do this too early, and the main focus of these companies is to reduce the technological risk of the premise at hand. If we force them to shift over to the VC funds metrics, that can be very counterproductive for the startup ecosystem. And, you know, people make fun of me because they say, look, you're always telling us off for trying to get startups to adapt to the metrics. But this is a great opportunity. We do need to give funds, obviously, also the chance to understand these dynamics. We have to, for example, go to, we shouldn't have to go to the US or Europe, etc., because there's no human capital in the region.
The last question, because we are really running out of time. So we have taken this first step. The challenge is now launched. I think that this study is, for us, at least a study that starts to trace a direction that we also want to adopt. So what would be the advice, not only for IDB Lab, but also for the people that are working in deep tech to continue driving this new wave that Nacho has just pitched? So we must shift this mindset of something done in LATAM to something created, ideated, developed in LATAM, and launched for the whole world globally. We need to think that what we're doing here must be used or can be used at a global level. We need to think out of the box and perhaps losing this fear that we are small, that we are less, and instead start thinking about the fact that we can have a global impact. So this is a global route. Yes, it needs to be a global route, made in LATAM, but used globally. I think it's about impact. We need to seek impact. We need to align investment with talent, with the greatest needs that the world is facing. And let's develop locally, as you all said. So I want to call on investors. I mean, in Chile, 2/3 investors are state originated. We must change this, and we need to start betting on these changes and to have a social and environmental change. This new economy has this virtuous triangle. Actually, we were in the SITLAC panel on the room next to this, and this conversation did not start or was not triggered by the larger companies. Yeah, we need capital and the needs. The greatest companies of LATAM, in general terms, actually create a really low aggregated value. We are still in a culture with an economy that hasn't really changed. And imagine the capital they have and the skills that they have to solve greatest challenges. So I think we need to literally combine supply and demand. But we all can reach profitability, and we can also add value. Matthias, how can we help you? I think that IDB Lab and the bank in general can be a great articulator of this conversation that still hasn't ended between the public, the scientific sector, and the private sector that we want to engage with. And due to our limitations and the limitations of the public sector, we haven't done so. And I think that the bank can be a great articulator in training the public sector and helping us literally draft and create this new language. So there's a great path to follow and to become a great agent of incentives and change that the public sector will certainly be appealed to. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation with you. And congratulations, Nacho, on the study and the team that composed it. And I'd also like to thank all those who've joined us participating in this session. Thank you.